STS-90, Neurolab, a 16-day mission to study the effects of microgravity.
Studies show at least 1/3 of all US citizens fail to get a good night's sleep. Well, a key part of Shuttle crew's mission will be to look at ways to solve those sleep problems in space and on the ground. CNN medical correspondent Al Hinman has our story.
What do astronauts in space have in common with a growing segment of folks back on Earth?
They have a lot going against them in terms of the ability to maintain a consolidated bout of restful sleep at night.
On Earth, doctors are worried as surveys show more people are getting less sleep each night, squeezed by the need to force more into already overcrowded days. In space, the biggest sleep problem is timing. Our natural sleep patterns are governed by an internal 24-hour clock regulated in part by sunrise and sunset. But on the shuttle, Earth orbits compress that day into 90 minutes. For the first time, researchers will be monitoring the complete sleep patterns of astronauts in space to figure out why they're losing so much sleep and to find out how to help them get more sleep. Instead of the prescription sleeping pills most astronauts rely on, this crew will be experimenting with melatonin, a natural hormone known to regulate sleep.
We think that this hormone shows promise, particularly in helping people sleep when they're trying to do so at an adverse time of day.
Like this shuttle crew, which will be forced to shift the morning wake-up call a half hour earlier each day to help compensate for the dramatically shortened day in space. But the mission isn't just about sleep. The Neurolab medical mission is designed to learn more about the effects of space on the human nervous system, such as how space affects the body's internal sense of gravity or balance. Those experiments could help those on Earth who suffer from vertigo and other balance problems. But sleep problems may get the quickest payoff from Neurolab's research in space and on the ground. Now, maybe some sleepy astronauts can help doctors offer us something better than counting sheep. Al Hinman, CNN, Atlanta.
Creme de la Creme der amerikanischen Weltraumindustrie, dicht gedrängt bei der ersten Konferenz über Transporte in und durch das All. So sieht der Verkehr im All rund um die Erde zurzeit aus. In 3 Jahrzehnten soll das hier Wirklichkeit sein. Frachtraumschiffe pendeln zwischen Weltraumbahnhöfen auf der Erde und im All. Tausende von Starts pro Tag und Reisen auf der Erde selbst würden dank des Umwegs durchs All viel schneller. 1 Stunde dauert dann der Flug von Amerika nach Europa. Ein Päckchen, das heute in Japan startet, könnte dank der Zeitverschiebung gewissermaßen gestern in Deutschland ankommen. Durch wiederverwendbare Shuttle sinken auch die Kosten. Eine Flugreise USA-Deutschland für $1.000. Auf Mond und Mars werden die Menschen zu Dauergästen. Eine japanische Firma plant schon an einer Mondkolonie. Ein kalifornisches Unternehmen bietet Touristen für das Jahr 2001 eine Reise ins All an für $180.000. Viel billiger soll es noch werden, wenn der Weltraum erstmal vollständig privatisiert ist. Stellen Sie sich vor, es gäbe nur regierungseigene Golfkurse, auf denen nur Regierungsmitglieder spielen dürften. So sieht es momentan im All aus. Die Öffentlichkeit hat bisher keinen Zugang. Irgendwann, so heißt es, würden die Shuttle-Fluglinien mit Sonderangeboten um Kunden werben. Jeder könnte dann im Weltall arbeiten oder Urlaub machen. Aber ein paar Jahrzehnte werden wir alle wohl noch zuschauen müssen.
Science and Technology Week, brought to you by IBM.
Hello and welcome. I'm Bill Hemmer. Ann Kellen is on vacation this week. As the U.S. inches toward a showdown with Iraq, military planners are testing a new generation of weapons. The new bombing systems are designed to solve some of the problems that plagued U.S. weapons during the 1991 Gulf War and to eliminate threats that they may find in Iraq. John Holloman went to Florida's Eglin Air Force Base to have a look for us.
Immediately after the Persian Gulf Air War started in 1991, military commanders were faced with 2 big problems. They couldn't always hit their targets with laser-guided bombs when the weather was cloudy because clouds interfere with the lasers. When the pilots flew low enough to guarantee a hit, they were vulnerable to enemy anti-aircraft fire. The Pentagon ordered researchers here at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, to solve these problems, and today, the scientists say they have.
We've capitalized on the ability to use the global positioning system. We can strike the Earth where we want in all weather, day or night.
Captain Mike Farrell was a weapons officer dropping bombs on Iraq during the Gulf War. Now he's a test pilot at Eglin, dropping the new smarter bombs on simulated enemy targets.
With HAR missiles and jamming platforms and everything else, we always go in with a package making the odds in our favor that we're going to do what we need to get done with the minimal damage to our own forces.
Farrell and pilot Troy Fontaine fly the F-15 Eagle, workhorse of the Gulf War. Their planes are outfitted with the new bunker buster bomb, guided not by lasers, but by satellites which don't depend on good weather. These new bombs can bore through several feet of concrete and not explode until they're inside a buried bunker. Scientists at Eglin are also testing a new bomb designed to find its way into a hidden underground bunker filled with chemical or biological weapons and burn them at extremely high temperature so the poisonous chemicals don't escape into the atmosphere. The pilots who train here to use these weapons say they've got the most sophisticated equipment in the world.
Many of the new systems we're working with have GPS-type systems on board the actual weapon itself. Again, that launch and leave capability makes us very unpredictable for the enemy.
If the U.S. strikes Iraq, weapons builders here say there will be dozens of improved weapons available to commanders and pilots. John Holloman, CNN, Eglin Air Force Base, Florida.
A very different kind of threat, the weather phenomenon called El Nino, is still creating havoc around the world. Newly released satellite images show the devastating effects of El Nino's floods and droughts, and experts say it is not finished with us just yet. David Mattingly has that story.
The relentless rains and floods and the intense droughts and forest fires resulting from the weather pattern El Nino have all been documented by remote satellites and ocean buoys. The newest images show the past year's global weather extremes.
So we already see drought conditions coming in over Malaysia and Indonesia, those red colors. Those brightest oranges are a decrease of rainfall of about 5 to 6 feet, and those bright green colors are about an increase of rainfall anywhere from 6 to 8 feet more than normal.
Data like this help experts take El Nino's pulse on a day-to-day basis. The scientists say this El Nino is bigger and longer than the one that began in 1982. And we are experiencing the weather event of the century right now.
When we compared the evolution of 1997 with the evolution of the 82-83 El Nino event, we see that the 1997 El Nino event started earlier in the calendar year. It reached a much more of a rapid onset, stayed warmer longer.
And they say it will be several more months before we get relief.
It's likely to stay warm in the tropical Pacific, so that means these sort of storm patterns over North America are likely to continue over the next 1 to 2 months.
El Nino reduced last year's hurricane season to about half, one good effect, but there's a chance that even if El Nino disappears by summer this year, it could be followed by La Nina, the opposite weather event, causing an unseasonal dip in temperature and rainfall. David Mattingly, CNN, reporting.
Californians are getting a harsh lesson about destructive El Nino storms this year, but scientists want to learn more. So they're flying right into the nastiest weather on the California coast and chasing it on the ground with high-tech Doppler radar.
Nothing can replace being there. We have to take detailed, precise measurements of the atmospheric conditions.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has filled this plane with advanced weather gear to poke, prod, and pry into these storms like a doctor examines a patient. The scientists are hoping to learn about certain characteristics of West Coast storms that even detailed satellite images have not been able to accurately reveal.
What happened to the cold front?
In particular, they're interested in low-level jet streams, which seem to trigger the heaviest rain.
It's largely unobserved. It's usually below the clouds that the satellites estimate their winds from, so you don't see it from the satellite very well.
In the midst of the storm, scientists must move by handrail through the bucking, pitching aircraft. On the ground below, one of 2 Doppler radar trucks takes position as the storm bears down on the coast. The trucks can move and set up quickly, catching storms at their peak.
We're using something new called dual Doppler, and that's particularly interesting because we'll be able to basically map the storms out in a kind of a 3D array.
The kind of information gathered might be able to give not only more precise storm forecasts, but give earlier warning.
How much rain you're going to get, how long it's going to last, and where it's going to be, which are the three things that the folks around here are interested in at this time of the year.
Better forecasting may not prevent all the damage from El Nino storms, but for people in the crosshairs of Mother Nature's fury, every bit helps. Jim Hill, CNN, off the California coast.
Skywatchers in the Caribbean are in for a special treat on Thursday. They will have a front row seat for a total eclipse of the sun. Eclipses occur when the Earth, Moon, and Sun all line up. And while the effect doesn't last long, for that brief moment, it's the greatest show on Earth. Few heavenly events are as stunningly beautiful as a total eclipse of the sun. On Thursday, if the weather is clear, skywatchers will have a chance to see the last total solar eclipse visible from the Western Hemisphere this millennium. Fred Espenak is NASA's resident expert on eclipses.
I personally think it's the most beautiful natural phenomenon I have ever seen.
In a solar eclipse, the moon passes between the Earth and the sun. Totality is that moment when the moon moves right in front of the sun's bright disk, completely covering it up.
The path of totality, which is fairly narrow, that's the path of total eclipse. It's only about 93 miles wide, and it swings across the Pacific, through northern South America, through the Caribbean, hits a couple of islands, and ends in the North Atlantic off of Africa.
People in the United States, Eastern Canada, and much of South America will see a partial eclipse. Wow! Whether viewing a total or partial eclipse, you should always remember never look at the sun directly with your eyes. Your retina could be badly damaged, and only certain filters will protect you.
Sunglasses are inappropriate, polarizing sunglasses are wrong, any kind of exposed photographic film can be dangerous unless you really know what you're doing. So for the average person, they shouldn't try using that.
To safely view the eclipse, use a pair of Mylar glasses like these, or purchase a number 14 welder's glass through a welding supply store. Or you can view the eclipse using a projection box.
You have to use some sort of projection technique, like building a cardboard box with a small pinhole, pointing that up at the sun, and the pinhole projects an image of the sun into the back of the box.
Scientists study solar eclipses from Earth and space-based telescopes in hopes of learning more about our sun and its mysterious corona, the halo of superhot gas that surrounds it. The next total solar eclipse will happen in August of next year and will be visible from Europe and Asia. During totality, viewers should be able to see several stars in the darkened sky. The planets Jupiter and Venus will also be visible to the west of the sun, and Mercury, Mars, and Saturn to the east. Here's a far-out story. This week, the NASA spacecraft Voyager 1 became the most distant man-made object in space. Launched more than 20 years ago, Voyager 1 is currently 6.5 billion miles from the sun, and it's moving away at almost 40,000 miles an hour. The previous most distant object was the Pioneer 10 spacecraft, which is traveling in almost exactly the opposite direction away from the sun. Despite its advanced age and remote location, Voyager 1 still works and is exploring the outer reaches of the solar system.
Florida ist zwar Stürme gewohnt, doch diese Wucht dieser Tornados, darauf war niemand vorbereitet. Wieder eine Folge des Wetterphänomens El Nino, meinen jedenfalls Experten. Claudia Engfeld über die Sturmnacht im Sonnenstart.
Der Gewalt der Tornados hatten diese Häuser nichts entgegenzusetzen. Wohnwagen wirbelten durch die Luft, Dächer wurden abgedeckt, Wände eingedrückt. Sturmgeschwindigkeiten von bis zu 120 Kilometern pro Stunde ließen tonnenschwere Lastwagen wie Spielzeugautos umkippen. In den Trümmern, so befürchten die Rettungsmannschaften, werde man noch mehr Opfer der Sturmkatastrophe finden. Er habe nur durch ein Wunder überlebt, erzählt dieser Mann. Ich saß in meiner Küche und plötzlich flog das Haus weg. Irgendwas hat mich an der Schulter getroffen, mehr nicht. Die Schneise der Verwüstung, sie beginnt südlich von Orlando und zieht sich hin bis zum Rennfahrermekka Daytona Beach. Dort drehten die Wirbelstürme ab Richtung Süden zum Raumfahrtzentrum Cape Canaveral. Das Schlimmste sei vorbei, so die Wetterexperten, vorläufig jedenfalls. In den nächsten Wochen könne es aber durchaus weitere Wirbelstürme geben.
Von den Verwüstungen betroffen ist ein 120 Kilometer langer Streifen zwischen Orlando und dem Autorennsport-Mekka Daytona Beach. Die Tornados wirbelten Mobilhäuser durch die Luft und rissen ganze Straßenzüge ein. In weiten Teilen des Katastrophengebiets ist die Elektrizitätsversorgung ausgefallen. Zahlreiche Straßen sind durch umgestürzte Strommasten und Autowracks blockiert.
Mindestens 40 Menschen sterben bei Tornados in der Nähe von Disney World. Tornados haben in den vergangenen 24 Stunden Teile des amerikanischen Bundesstaates Florida verwüstet. Dabei kamen wahrscheinlich mehr als 40 Menschen ums Leben. Die Windhosen erreichten Geschwindigkeiten von bis zu 400 Stundenkilometern. Mitarbeiter des Katastrophenschutzes sprachen von den schlimmsten Verwüstungen seit vielen Jahren. Ralf Vogestradt berichtet.
Aus der Luft sehen die Siedlungen nördlich des Touristenzentrums Orlando aus wie nach einem Bombenangriff. Mindestens 12 Tornados fegten ohne Vorwarnung durch die Gegend und zerstörten, was ihnen in den Weg kam. Selbst Lastwagen wurden wie Spielzeugautos umgeworfen, Personenwagen landeten in völlig demolierten Häusern. Die Bewohner kommen erst langsam aus ihren Schlupflöchern. Die lokalen Fernsehsender wie hier Kanal 6 sind zur Katastrophenberichterstattung übergegangen und berichten ihren Zuschauern rund um die Uhr über Notunterkünfte und Blutsammelstellen. Es hörte sich an, als ob ein Zug kommen würde. Wir flüchteten ins Schlafzimmer und warfen uns auf den Boden. Da stürzt auch schon das Dach auf unser Bett. Es ist fürchterlich, erzählte diese Frau. Die Bergungsarbeiten gehen langsam voran. Die Retter arbeiten sich von Haus zu Haus vor und markieren die Gebäude, die sie schon untersucht haben. Es ist schwierig, in dieser Zerstörung die Opfer zu finden. Die Toten werden erst einmal vor Ort liegen gelassen, um sie später aufzusammeln. Die Behörden sagen, dass noch viele Menschen in Kellern und unter Trümmern eingesperrt sind. Es wird erwartet, dass die Zahl der Opfer weiter steigt.
Besonders betroffen Wohnwagensiedlungen, von denen nur noch Trümmer übrig sind. Teile Floridas wurden zum Katastrophengebiet erklärt.
Die Tornados kamen mitten in der Nacht, blitzschnell mit über 300 Stundenkilometern. Sie überraschten viele ihrer Opfer im Schlaf. Autos wurden durch die Luft gewirbelt, so beschreibt er die Gewalt der Stürme. Aber das ganze Ausmaß der Verwüstung wird erst bei Tageslicht sichtbar. Von Tampa am Golf von Mexiko bis nach Daytona Beach am Atlantik deckten die Tornados Dächer ab, knickten Wände und Mauern ein. Selbst ein Einkaufscenter mit 27 Geschäften wurde beinahe völlig zerstört. Immer wieder fanden die Rettungstrupps Verletzte und Tote, die versucht hatten, ins Freie zu fliehen. Bisher liegt die Zahl der Todesopfer offiziell bei 27. Sie könnte weiter steigen, weil unter den Trümmern weitere Opfer vermutet werden. Schuld an dem Desaster ist nach Angaben von US-Wissenschaftlern El Niño. Das Wetterphänomen im Pazifik beeinflusst die Luftströmungen über ganz Amerika und erzeugt dadurch schwere Regenfälle und Stürme. Denen hat die Leichtbauweise vieler Häuser hier nichts entgegenzusetzen. Und so ein Wohnmobilpark ist für einen Tornado erst recht leichte Beute.
Vorhin haben Sie in den Nachrichten ja von den Tornados über Florida gehört. Und diese Tornados waren verbunden mit einer Kaltfront, die man hier auf dem aktuellen Satellitenbild sieht, die jetzt zwischen Florida und Kuba liegt. Aber heute Nacht war das Ganze noch weiter nach Norden verschoben und lag bei Orlando. Und hier sehen wir das Satellitenbild von heute Nacht und eingekreist die Bereiche, in denen die Tornados aufgetreten sind. So viel heute vom Wetter.
At least 29 people are dead and some 250 others injured after severe storms and tornadoes in the central parts of the state. The Seminole County Sheriff's Office said there were so many tornadoes touching down they couldn't even keep track of them. Meanwhile, the West Coast is bracing for more rain. CNN's Dan Ronan has our report.
From the air, you can get an overview of the extensive damage in central Florida. When you see ground-level pictures, you can get a very close look at the spinning tear that struck the region. Weather officials say it's the deadliest series of tornadoes since they've kept records beginning in 1950. At a mobile home park near Orlando, several people were killed and injured. There were also remarkable survivor stories. Listen to a rescue worker who told about a man whose mobile home was tossed by a tornado into the St. Johns River with him in it.
Before he could get to the door, the tornado hit his mobile home and took him and the mobile home into the river. And he was lucky enough to have put his life jacket on to go out and check the boats. And that's what saved his life. It drifted him down. He was found about a mile from where the tornado touched down.
Wet and badly shaken, but alive. Others were amazed at how quickly the tornadoes hit.
I looked out the window and I could see it coming from the west. And as soon as they dropped the blind, it hit right there. And you could hear the train coming. Vroom, vroom. Boy, and that was it. And the two trailers on the north side of me are completely wiped right out.
Dan Ronan, CNN reporting.
Now for the complete U.S. weather picture, here's CNN's Orlin Sidney.
Well, strong thunderstorms moved through Florida overnight and left several areas with damage and casualties. The most damage reported really around the Orlando area, around Seminole County, Orange County, Lake County, back to the north. We have had several reports of tornadoes in those areas and lots of damage, even a report of a tornado down at Tampa. It looks like that activity is pretty much over with, though, as the cold front that caused all the problem has pushed off the coast.
Hat im US-Bundesstaat Florida schwere Verwüstungen angerichtet. Mindestens 29 Menschen kamen ums Leben. Die Behörden hatten zuvor von 43 Toten gesprochen. Durch die Wucht der Tornados wurden mobile Häuser durch die Luft gewirbelt und zahlreiche Dächer abgedeckt. In vielen Gegenden des Katastrophengebietes fiel der Strom aus. Besonders betroffen waren der Osten und die Mitte Floridas. Meteorologen machen das Klimaphänomen El Niño für die schweren Stürme verantwortlich.
Es werden Rekorde gemessen, traurige Rekorde, die für Touristen alles andere als einladend sind. Wirbelstürme in Serie, die mit bislang kaum gekannter Wucht übers Land peitschen. Noch sind die Opfer und die Schäden nicht abschließend gezählt. Klaus-Peter Siegloch berichtet.
So etwas haben auch die wirbelsturmerprobten Amerikaner lange nicht erlebt. Autos, die durchs Dach ins Wohnzimmer flogen. Eine ganze Serie von Tornados zog schneisender Verwüstung durch Florida. Von Tampa über Orlando bis Daytona Beach. Der Wind hatte Geschwindigkeiten von bis zu 340 Stundenkilometern. Die meisten Menschen waren von den Tornados im Schlaf überrascht worden. Mehr als 250 kamen verletzt ins Krankenhaus. Bis zum Abend waren 38 Menschen tot geborgen worden und die Zahl der Opfer wächst stündlich. Mindestens 10 Menschen werden noch vermisst. Dies war bis vorgestern ein Park für Wohnmobile. Ein Twister hat die schweren Gefährte in Sekunden umgeworfen. Besonders viele alte Menschen waren aus dem Norden hierher in den Sonnenstaat Florida gezogen. Jetzt stehen sie vor dem Nichts. Unser neuer Wagen ist ruiniert, sagt sie. Er war erst 700 Meilen gelaufen. Wir sind arme Leute, wir wären besser dran, wenn der Sturm uns getötet hätte. Unter den Trümmern suchen Rettungsmannschaften weiter nach Opfern. Zum Beispiel nach dem 18 Monate alten Baby, das der Tornado aus den Armen seines Vaters riss. Es blieb bisher verschwunden in dem Gewirr von Bauholz und zertrümmerten Möbeln. Alles flog über unsere Köpfe und begrub uns, berichtet er. Wir sind dann herausgekrochen. Die Serie von 6 bis 10 Tornados zerstörte mehrere hundert Häuser, traf in Orlando zum Glück aber nicht die Umgebung der großen Vergnügungsparks wie Disney World, wo zurzeit viele Touristen aus aller Welt wohnen. Wetterexperten geben der Warmwasserströmung El Niño die Mitschuld an der tödlichsten Wirbelsturmserie in Florida seit 50 Jahren. An der Westküste Amerikas, wie hier in Kalifornien, sorgt El Niño inzwischen für neue Regen- und Sturmrekorde. Er hat in den vergangenen 2 Wochen die Hälfte seines Grundstücks an den Pazifik verloren, der mit bis zu 6 Meter hohen Wellen gegen das Ufer brandet. Wie hier in den Hügeln von Santa Monica kann die Erde an vielen Orten die Wassermassen nicht mehr aufnehmen. Schlammlawinen rutschen in die Täler. Mit Plastikplanen versuchen Hausbesitzer in Hollywood die Regenmassen abzuhalten. Glück hatte dieser Spaziergänger, den die Regenflut mit seinen 2 Hunden in einen Kanal gespült hatte. Mit einem Hubschrauber wurden seine Hunde und er aus den Fluten gezogen.
Das Wetter ist weltweit nicht aus den Fugen geraten. El Niño ist ein ganz normales, regelmäßig wiederkehrendes Klimaphänomen. Und trotzdem gerät alles aus den Fugen da, wo El Niño eben sich austobt. Seit Wochen trifft es jetzt den Süden der USA und Lateinamerika. Von dort stammt ja auch das Wort El Niño, das Christkind, weil peruanische Fischer bemerkt hatten, dass das Wetter regelmäßig ab Weihnachten verrückt spielte. Dieses Jahr hat El Niño Peru wieder ganz besonders erwischt. Jochen nun über die völlig überschwemmte Hauptstadt Lima.
Das hat Limas Bevölkerung noch nie erlebt. Brusttief im Wasser wehren sich Tausende gegen die Fluten des Rio Rimac, der die 7-Millionen-Stadt durchquert. Sintflutartige Regenfälle in den nahen Bergen haben den ansonsten trägen Fluss anschwellen, die Straßen bis zu 1,5 Meter hoch überschwemmen lassen. Bilder des peruanischen Fernsehkanals 9. Die Überschwemmung war so plötzlich, dass wir uns weder vorbereiten noch gar Gegenmaßnahmen ergreifen konnten, sagt diese Frau. Gab es denn keine Warnungen, fragt der Reporter. Nein, nichts. Die Behörden hätten die Bevölkerung informieren müssen. Eine Tote, Dutzende Verletzte, über 1000 Häuser unter Wasser. Die El Niño-Bilanz der letzten 36 Stunden allein in Perus Hauptstadt Lima. Und so sieht es wenige Kilometer vom Stadtzentrum entfernt aus. Menschen rufen um Hilfe. Viele haben sich auf Dächer oder Erdhügel geflüchtet, nur wenige Habseligkeiten vor den Wassermassen retten können. Eine schmutzig braune, dreckige Brühe aus Schlamm, Geröll, Steinen wälzt sich durch die armen Siedlungen. Die Behausungen sind meist aus Lehmziegeln, Holz oder Wellblech, werden durch die Fluten schnell mitgerissen. Obwohl Peru bereits vergangenes Jahr Millionen in die Katastrophenvorsorge investiert hatte, oft machen die tagelangen Regenstürme alle Vorbereitungen zunichte. Dies belegen auch diese Bilder aus Chiclayo im Norden Perus. Überschwemmungen, unterbrochene Fernstraßen, weggerissene Brücken, zerstörte Felder und Ernten, Dörfer und Städte unter Wasser, oft tagelang von der Außenwelt abgeschnitten. Bereits seit Wochen sind weite Teile Perus Notstandsgebiete. Es drohen Epidemien wie Cholera und Malaria. Die Schreckensbilanz der bisherigen El Niño-Wochen lässt sich nur vorsichtig schätzen. An die 200 Tote, Tausende Verletzte, Zehntausende Obdachlose, Millionen Schäden. Hier im Departement La Valleque, rund 900 Kilometer nördlich von Lima, haben gestern erste Aufräumarbeiten begonnen. Perus Meteorologen erwarten jedoch für März und April weitere El Niño-Höhepunkte. Das Land wird eine Geisel des Wetters bleiben.
Überschwemmungen in Amerika, auch in Ostafrika übrigens, in anderen Regionen, zum Beispiel Asiens, extreme Trockenheit. Und auch die führen Forscher auf El Niño zurück. Dieses Mal ist das Phänomen besonders stark ausgeprägt. Das hatten die Wissenschaftler vom Max-Planck-Institut in Hamburg schon vorausgesagt. Dort hat sich Claudia Schulz-Britz heute informiert über El Niño, über Klimatabellen in Computerprogrammen. Und doch, so exakt auch die Berechnungen und die Vorhersagen sind, die Auswirkungen, Verwüstungen zum Beispiel in diesen Tagen in Florida und in Kalifornien, sind doch nicht zu verhindern.
Es waren die schlimmsten Stürme in Florida seit einem halben Jahrhundert. Die Tornados verwüsteten alles, was ihnen in die Quere kam. Mindestens 38 Menschen kamen ums Leben, immer noch gibt es Vermisste. Die Tornados waren mit Spitzengeschwindigkeiten von bis zu 400 Stundenkilometern durch Zentral-Florida gerast. Ebenfalls ein Bild der Verwüstung einige Regionen in Kalifornien. Schlammlawinen rissen Häuser weg. Es entstand Sachschaden in Höhe von fast 400 Millionen Mark. Ende des vergangenen Jahres hatte es bereits Ostafrika getroffen. Ausgiebige Regenfälle setzten weite Teile Kenias unter Wasser. In Peru nehmen die Überschwemmungen bis heute kein Ende. Das eine Gesicht von El Niño. Das andere zeigte sich bereits im vergangenen Herbst. Sorgt das Klimaphänomen in einem Teil der Welt für Regen, trocknen woanders die Regenwälder aus. Die Folge: verheerende Waldbrände tobten in Australien und Südostasien.
Infolge der El Niño-Erwärmung kommt es zu einer Erhöhung der Temperatur im Ostpazifik um etwa 4 bis 5 Grad. Dies führt dazu, dass das Regengebiet, das sich normalerweise im indonesisch-australischen Raum befindet, nach Osten abwandert. Und dies führt eben dazu, dass wir dann hier über Südamerika sehr, sehr starke Regenfälle bis hin zu Überschwemmungen haben. Dafür aber umgekehrt im Bereich von Südostasien und Australien extreme Dürre.
Bereits seit über 15 Jahren wird im Max-Planck-Institut über El Niño, seine Ursachen und Folgen geforscht. Die Untersuchungen begannen also zeitgleich mit dem bis dahin stärksten El Niño 1983. Auch damals traf es besonders Peru. Auch damals brachen die Stürme im Dezember aus. Alle 4 Jahre kommt es in aller Regel zu dem Phänomen El Niño. Ein Jahr im Voraus können die Forscher ihn vorhersagen. Es gibt ihn schon viele Jahrhunderte lang. Warum es immer wieder zu der Erwärmung des Pazifiks kommt, wissen Forscher allerdings nicht. Auch inwieweit menschliches Eingreifen seine Häufigkeit und Intensität beeinflusst, ist umstritten. Im Max-Planck-Institut ist man jedoch von einem Zusammenhang zwischen dem Treibhauseffekt und der Entwicklung von El Niño überzeugt.
Wir haben mithilfe unserer globalen Klimamodelle den Einfluss des Treibhauseffekts, der globalen Erwärmung auf den El Niño berechnet. Und wir haben gefunden, dass El Niño-Situationen, die hier in Rot dargestellt sind, etwa Mitte des nächsten Jahrhunderts häufiger auftreten werden, als es heute der Fall ist. Und insofern besteht zu befürchten, dass wir in eine Art Dauer-El Niño kommen, wenn wir weiterhin so viel Mengen CO2 in die Atmosphäre entlassen, wie wir es heute tun. Dies wird natürlich extreme Auswirkungen auf Länder wie Südostasien und Australien und Südamerika, aber auch Nordamerika haben.
Der derzeitige El Niño, der stärkste, den es je gegeben hat, hat seinen Höhepunkt bereits überschritten. Für die Bewohner von Florida wird es ein schwacher Trost sein. Noch bis zum Sommer müssen die betroffenen Regionen mit seinen Unwettern rechnen.
At least 38 people are dead and hundreds injured after tornadoes ripped through central Florida. 11 others are still reported missing. 14 counties in the state have been granted disaster relief status.
Südkalifornien versinkt im Schlamm. In diesem Canyon bei Laguna Beach wurde ein Mann unter Haustrümmern verschüttet. Er hatte im Hinterland Schutz gesucht, nachdem Pazifikwellen sein eigenes Haus am Strand zerstört hatten. Ganz in der Nähe hatte in der Nacht Todd Tingey das Baby einer völlig verzweifelten Mutter aus dem Schlamm gerettet. Ich habe es zuerst für einen Klumpen Lehm gehalten, aber dann sah ich, dass es ein Säugling war. Überall sind die Straßen unterspült. Bei San Diego machte ein 230 Meter langer Krater ein Autobahnkreuz der Interstate 15 unpassierbar. Wasser und Schlamm reißen alles mit sich, selbst tonnenschwere Trucks haben keine Chance. 2 Polizisten, die einem festsitzenden Autofahrer helfen wollten, wurden mit ihrem Wagen in einen Fluss gespült. Für sie kam jede Hilfe zu spät. Das Unwetter hat auch viele Tiere getroffen. Nur wenige konnten bisher gerettet werden. In Florida hat sich die Zahl der Wirbelsturmopfer auf 39 erhöht. Für 3 noch vermisste Menschen besteht wenig Hoffnung. Er ist seit gestern das Wunderbaby von Kissimmee. Der 1,5-jährige Jonathan war von einer Windhose samt Matratze aus der Wiege gerissen und durch die Luft in diese Eiche geschleudert worden. Nachbarn fanden ihn zwischen den Zweigen. Jonathan hat nur ein paar Kratzer. Präsident Clinton verließ am Morgen Washington Richtung Florida. Er will sich selbst vor Ort ein Bild von der Katastrophe machen.
Laguna Beach, Kalifornien. Eine reißende Flut aus Wassermassen und Schlamm verschlingt die Straße. Ein Autofahrer befreit sich aus seinem versinkenden Fahrzeug, kämpft sich zu dem rettenden Hubschrauber. Er überlebt. Schlamm verkrustet, ebenso wie diese Frau, schockiert über die ungeheure Kraft der Natur. Ich rettete ihr Kind, sagt dieser Mann. Es war nur ein Klumpen Schlamm. Ich konnte gar nicht begreifen, dass ich ein Kind in meinen Händen hielt. Aber allein in Kalifornien starben bei diesem Unwetter 9 Menschen. 18 Stunden lang prasselte der Dauerregen auf die Erde herunter, schwemmte sie fort, riss ganze Berghänge weg. Das Wasser hat das Erdreich unter einigen Straßen herausgespült. Ein Riesenloch klafft in dieser Trasse. An der Küste fraß der aufgepeitschte Pazifik an den Klippen, ließ große Stücke herabbröckeln. Tausende Kilometer südlich in Peru bringt El Niño ebenfalls Tod und Leid über die Menschen. Hier, wo normalerweise Hitze und Dürre das Land auslaugen, traf die Sintflut die Einwohner überraschend und hart. Durch die schlechten hygienischen Bedingungen in dieser Region sind Epidemien ausgebrochen, das Trinkwasser wird knapp. Nach Einschätzung von Meteorologen wird der tödliche Einfluss von El Niño auf das Klima erst in einigen Monaten nachlassen.
Der Regen schwemmt die Erde fort. In Kalifornien stürzen Schlammlawinen von Bergen, sie überspülen Häuser, reißen Möbel und Menschen mit. 9 Tote an Amerikas Westküste, Hunderte sind obdachlos. Rettungstrupps im Dauereinsatz. Straßen stehen unter Wasser oder brechen weg. 2 Polizisten verunglückten tödlich, als sie in diesen Krater rasten. Sie wollten eingeschlossenen Autofahrern helfen. In Florida haben viele alles verloren. Mindestens 39 Menschen starben. Doch eine Familie erzählt vom Glück im Unglück. Das Haus der Drivers zerschmetterte ein Twister, als die Großmutter gerade ihre Enkel in Sicherheit bringen wollte. Den 18 Monate alten Jonathan fegte der Sturm mit seinem Bett weg. Panik, bis ein Nachbar den Kleinen in diesem Baum fand, eingewickelt in seine Decke. Er steckte eingeklemmt zwischen Ästen. Ich habe gerufen, Jonathan, Jonathan. Da fing er an zu weinen. Ich sagte, wir holen dich raus. Jonathan ist mit ein paar Kratzern davongekommen, offenbar sogar ohne großen Schrecken. Eine glückliche Oma mit einem fröhlichen Enkel. Präsident Clinton eingetroffen im Katastrophengebiet. Florida seine erste Station. Anschließend reist er nach Kalifornien. Er zeigt Anteilnahme und verspricht finanzielle Hilfe.
The U.S. government is promising emergency funding for parts of central Florida devastated by a string of violent tornadoes. On Wednesday, President Bill Clinton toured the region by helicopter. In addition to federal disaster aid, Mr. Clinton said $3 million from the U.S. Labor Department will be made available for temporary jobs. At least 39 people are dead, hundreds injured. Several people are still missing. Early damage estimates put losses at more than $24 million. On the U.S. West Coast, the state of California is being forced to take the El Nino weather phenomenon seriously. CNN's Don Knapp has more on that.
Oh, huge, huge, huge! Whoa!
It's a ground assault. Heavy rains have pushed and pulled at the California landscape. North of Los Angeles, in the town of Earlimart, there is little high ground left. These people are standing on a highway overpass. The underpass is way underwater. So is this one. Others couldn't get out of the way fast enough. This horse stuck on a sandbar in an overflowing stream had to be airlifted to safety. On the coast, some residents cleaned out their homes, but others, like the owner of this home, didn't get the chance.
You mean that whole part is gone? I can't believe that.
It's bad on the cliffs, and it proved no safer on the below. Because what the sea hasn't claimed, the land is swallowing fast. This sinkhole in San Diego keeps growing. It started as a 20 by 20 foot hole. It's now 600 feet long, 50 feet wide in places, and as much as 70 feet deep. In Santa Maria, California, this road is completely washed out. 2 highway patrol officers died when their patrol car plunged into the rushing water. 2 other men had to be rescued by helicopter.
I felt that I fell for 2 or 3 seconds, and I hit the river. It broke my driver's side window, and the water immediately came into the car, and I went, I'm going to die.
The bodies of the highway patrol officers were finally recovered late Tuesday. There's still a question of the fate of a driver of a pickup truck found near the patrol car. No body was recovered. Don Knapp, CNN, Santa Maria, California.
In Central Florida, President Clinton toured damaged areas, including this trailer park where a tornado killed 10 people. Here he stopped to talk with some survivors, among them Peggy and Richard Smith, whose home was obliterated.
Don't get up. No, it's okay.
I got a hug.
Oh, thank you.
I got a hug. Thank you for coming.
What was your... This is glad to meet you, sir.
We love you.
God bless you. God bless you. Well, you've been through a lot, haven't you?
Yes, we have. We have.
The Smiths told the president about the winds that spun their trailer around and around, about their friends and neighbors who died in the storm, and how they tried to get their bearings once the storm passed.
I had lost my hearing aid, and we found it. He found my hearing aid.
You found your hearing aid?
I
can identify with that.
And Peggy Smith told the president about her black eye, the result of flying debris.
Your eye will heal up. I wish you could. I've had a lot of black eyes in my life.
Later, the Smiths said talking to the president gave them comfort and strength. It will help them, they said, to get through this disaster.
He knows what we're going through. He knows, and he cares. He's a very caring person.
As he spoke, I'll mention one thing. He had a tear in his eye.
The Smiths, who spend their winters here, say they plan to go out and buy a new mobile home. And once they clean up the debris, they say, they'll put it on the same spot where their other mobile home once stood. Robert Vito, CNN, Osceola County, Florida.
Man das Naturereignis außer in Kolumbien auch in weiten Teilen Panamas, Venezuelas und über einigen Karibikinseln.
Weißer Sand, Palmen und ein strahlend blauer Himmel, ein perfekter Tag auf der Insel Aruba und ein idealer Tag für eine Sonnenfinsternis. Während die Urlauber sich am Strand ahlen, bauen die Astronomen riesige Teleskope auf, um den wichtigen Moment nicht zu verpassen. Das Einzige, was diesen da noch verpatzen könnte, wäre schlechtes Wetter. Es könnten ein paar kleine Wolken am Himmel sein, vielleicht ein bisschen Dunst, aber in den vergangenen 8 Tagen war der Himmel immer klar und wir sind zuversichtlich. Und dann ist hoffentlich zu sehen, was alle erwarten. Der Mond schiebt sich zwischen Erde und Sonne und wirft seinen Schatten auf die Erdoberfläche. Im Gebiet des Kernschattens verdunkelt die Erde dann die Sonne vollständig. Um etwa 19 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit geht das Schauspiel los und dauert kaum mehr als 3 Minuten. Trotzdem, wer es verpasst, muss lange warten. Die nächste totale Sonnenfinsternis ist dort erst wieder 2017 zu sehen.
Der amerikanische Präsident Bill Clinton ist nach Florida gereist, um sich nach den verheerenden Wirbelstürmen einen Eindruck von den Schäden zu verschaffen, aber auch um den Überlebenden Trost zu spenden. In der Nacht zum Montag waren 12 Tornados über den Sonnenstaat hinweggerast. Mindestens 39 Menschen kamen dabei ums Leben.
Auf dem Ponderosa Pine Campingplatz, den es besonders schlimm getroffen hatte, tat der Präsident das, was er vielleicht am besten kann, den Menschen das Gefühl zu vermitteln, dass sich jemand um sie kümmert. Dass er hier ist und uns Hilfe bringt, das allein hilft weiter, sagt dieser Mann. 37 der bislang 39 Tornadoopfer kamen in Wohnmobilsiedlungen wie dieser ums Leben, die den Windgeschwindigkeiten von bis zu 400 Stundenkilometern wenig entgegenzusetzen hatten. Was immer wir tun können, damit ihr Leben wieder in Ordnung kommt, werden wir tun, versprach der Präsident. Welche gewaltigen Kräfte der Tornado freisetzte, das beweisen diese Bilder, die die Überwachungskamera eines Supermarktes aufnahm. Der Sturmwind fegte im Inneren des Gebäudes Waren von den Regalen. Clinton kündigte an, dass die Sturmopfer $3 Millionen an Soforthilfe bekommen sollen. Der Gesamtschaden wird auf über $60 Millionen geschätzt. Danach ging es gleich weiter nach Kalifornien, wo sich der Präsident heute das andere Unwettergebiet ansehen will. Die Küstenregion ist von El Niño-Stürmen schwer getroffen und nach ein paar sonnigen Tagen droht schon wieder eine neue Regenfront.
Fascinates, attracts and frightens thousands in the Caribbean and Latin America. You're looking at a live picture. A solar eclipse that is already darkening some of the Caribbean, Venezuela and Colombia, and is being seen far beyond. Professional astronomers and partying cruise passengers have gathered in several spots, including Curacao, to see what happens when, as you're watching now, the moon comes between the Earth and the sun. In much of Haiti, though, a different story. Schools and businesses were set to close down, and people were staying indoors for fear of being blinded by the event. We have live pictures, and while we watch, joining us for a little background and reassurance is George Whitbrow, a senior solar scientist at the U.S. Space Agency, NASA. Thanks so much for being with us. What are we seeing, and why is everyone so excited about it?
Well, a solar eclipse is one of the most beautiful events you can see in nature. Personally, I have not seen one live, but when the moon covers up the sun, you get an absolutely spectacular view of the outer atmosphere of the sun. It's called the corona, and everybody who's seen it says it's just spectacular. Birds start chirping because they think it's night. It's just a very interesting human event.
Now we're looking at live pictures, and we can see some of the people who've just come to have a look in Aruba, which is what we're watching now. But let me ask you about what interest, if any, this holds for scientists.
Okay, scientists have always really liked these eclipses because the only time we can see the outer atmosphere of the sun, which is about 1 million times fainter than the disk, is when there's an eclipse, when the moon gets in the way. And this is the only time we can really do a very high look at the very fine spatial details. We have instruments up in space which can make artificial eclipses, but they just do not get the detail we can get from the ground.
I'm intrigued by this, and as we watch, one thing to mention, by our clock is a little bit more than 8 minutes past the hour. At 11 minutes past the hour, the eclipse will be total. So is there going to be complete darkness, or are people who are where the eclipse is complete suddenly going to see stars and what they would be seeing at night? Okay,
The eclipse, the totality band's only about 90 miles wide, goes across, northern South America and across the Caribbean. It'll be just like night almost for them. For most of the rest of us, particularly in North America, we will just get a partial eclipse, and it should point out that people should not look at the sun directly, particularly during a partial eclipse, because you can hurt your eyes.
Now, as we're watching, our cameras, forgive me for interrupting, are bouncing around the world. These pictures are coming to us from Curacao now. In Haiti, they are very afraid. We alluded to that earlier. In one village, some of the people there are telling others that their eyes will explode if they look at the sun. Is there anything dangerous or ominous about this event at all?
No, the danger is if you look at the sun when you can still see part of the disk, because then the sun is dark and your eye lets in too much light, and you can actually do very severe damage to your eyes. So you don't want to look at it unless it's completely total. And as I say, in North America, and anywhere other than where the totality is, you shouldn't look directly at the sun.
The pictures we're looking at now are back reaching us from Aruba. You alluded to something earlier, which is how birds behave. People get excited, but how does the rest of the natural world respond to this? Plants, animals, and the planet itself?
Well, they get confused because they think it's night if they're in a total eclipse. But for us here in Washington, you can't even tell it. There's the eclipse. The sun is partially eclipsed now by about 20%.
If you're watching along with us, you can just make out the corona of the sun, and the eclipse is just about total. By our clock, it's still a few seconds away. There you go, a remarkable image. Now, what we're seeing is, I guess, the corona, the outskirts of the sun, and the interest to scientists is about flares. Do we ever feel those flares here on Earth, or are they just something we see in the sky?
Okay, now you're seeing the corona very nicely. This bright halo around the sun is the corona. You can see the fine detail now in this picture. Those little ray-like structures are part of the fine detail. And there are two reasons why we're interested in the corona. First of all, it's very hot, about 3 million degrees Fahrenheit. We want to know why. The second thing is the corona is so hot, it's blowing away from the sun, and these gusts of what we call the solar wind at about 1,000,000 miles an hour, when these gusts hit the Earth, they can have effects. They can produce the aurora, or northern and southern lights. If we get really strong ones, it can affect satellites, affect their systems. And when you get a really bad one like we did in March 1989, it actually affected a power grid in Canada, caused a blackout in Quebec for 9 hours. Now, most of these are rare events, those kind of things, but it's the impact on Earth is one of the reasons we're interested in this.
How many times a year is there an eclipse someplace on the planet?
I meant to look that up before I came here. I think you can have 2 eclipses per year, but the really good eclipses like this one happen every several years.
And how different are the kinds of things that people on Earth are learning compared to, I gather there are telescopes out in space that are watching this as well?
Yes, we have a large solar observatory that's out between the Earth and the Sun called SOHO, which is making pictures right now during the solar eclipse, but these are not quite as high a resolution as we can get from the ground. So we'll have this complementary high resolution from the ground plus the continuous pictures we get from SOHO, which we get every day and been getting for 2 years.
We saw just a moment ago a shot of, in fact, people in the darkness on the ground, give you a sense of just how much like night it is. I gather that NASA, correct me if I'm wrong, is putting some of the images it's making available on the internet so that people can be watching this via computer if they aren't near a TV or choose to be looking in that way.
Yes, there's the Exploratorium, which is mentioned there, is providing live images, and there was going to be an attempt, I don't know if it was successful, to actually see the shadow from the GOES 10 spacecraft as a shadow went across the Earth. The shadow incidentally moves very quickly, about 1,500 miles per hour is how fast the shadow is moving across the Earth.
And in fact, from the vantage point of this camera, we are seeing now as the sun, or rather the moon, moves across the path of the sun, and so the eclipse is now coming to an end from the perspective of this camera.
Yes.
But this eclipse, we should make clear, will be visible at different times as it makes its way around the planet.
Yes. It takes just from Panama to Antigua, it takes about an hour for the shadow to get from one to the other.
Well, we're looking at a map now of the different places that we'll be seeing this. How much is there left to learn about this? One of the things that intrigues me is that astronomy is a very old science, and eclipses, of course, predate human life on this planet. You'd think we would know just about everything there is to know about this by now?
Well, one of the reasons that we don't know as much as is the sun varies. It has a 11-year sunspot cycle, so every eclipse we have looks somewhat different. It's like, it's like weather on the Earth. The sun has weather, and so we want to study it during all of its phases of its weather pattern. And right now we're very close to what's called solar minimum. In the year 2000, right at the millennium, we'll be at solar maximum. And at that time, for example, the sun will be much more gusty. There'll be a lot more flares and a lot more effects on Earth, a lot more aurora.
Now, if you're watching, we are still looking at live pictures. Our director, Steve Feinberg, reminds me we haven't moved back in time, but we have simply changed the location of our cameras. So with the aid of television and satellites and technology, we're going to have the experience all over again as another part of the Earth experiences this. I gather there's going to be other solar eclipses coming up in Sumatra and Borneo in August, in Australia and in Europe and in Asia in 1999. Are there scientists, are there enthusiasts that you know of who make it a habit of traveling from eclipse to eclipse?
Oh, yes. I have colleagues who've gone to every eclipse for the last 20 years. They just really enjoy it, and each one they refine their experiments to hopefully learn just a little bit more than that they did the last time. And incidentally, when you see what you see here, this bright ring around the sun, with a really good camera, with really good film, you see that glow extending way out to the edge of the TV picture. You can see out to several solar diameters, the same structure. You're just seeing the innermost, brightest part here.
The moon is moving now off the path. What is this called?
This is called the diamond ring effect. Because just as the moon first lets the bright part of the sun go through, you get this very bright flash. It looks just like a diamond ring, that's hence the name.
It looks like morning is coming quickly to Curacao. It's a fascinating thing. It just takes a moment for the experience of night to come and go. Extraordinary things. George Whitbrough, it has been fascinating to watch this. People around the world are going to continue to watch it. George Whitbrough, a senior solar scientist at NASA, thanks so much for this.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
We'll be back with more world news right after this.
Stargazers in the Caribbean and parts of South America got a treat this week, a total eclipse of the sun. It happened around midday on Thursday as the moon passed between the Earth and the sun. For people in the area of totality, all that was visible was the sun's corona, flaring from behind the moon's shadow. Other places saw a partial eclipse. It's the last total eclipse in the Western Hemisphere in this century. Scientists are astounded by new research that suggests our universe may be expanding faster than we expected. If that's true, it could dramatically change our understanding of the basic laws of science, even the law of gravity. Ever since the Big Bang, the universe has been expanding, and scientists always thought that gravity was slowly putting the brakes on that expansion. Now new research suggests that's not so. Gravity may be taking a back seat to a mysterious anti-gravitational force, and the expansion of the universe may be speeding up.
If it's speeding up, it implies the universe is going to expand forever. It also allows us to figure out how long ago it all began.
Using giant Earth-based telescopes in Hawaii and Chile, and the Hubble Space Telescope, a team of scientists from around the world tracked the debris of exploded stars called supernovae.
How far away a supernova is and how fast it's moving away from us tells us how fast the universe is expanding.
The results defied the current laws of gravity and stunned the research team.
It's very disturbing to find something so out of the ordinary. I liken it to, if you took a ball and you threw it up in the air, you expect it to eventually come back down, and if it took off and went up, you would think, somebody was playing a trick on you. There was a string attached or something.
The only explanation, they say, is what Albert Einstein first suspected years ago, the presence of an anti-gravity force that researchers suspect exists in vacuums. Gravity overrides this force on Earth, even in our solar system, but it's a force to be reckoned with in the giant vacuums of space.
And over that length of distance, this force continues to multiply and add up, while most other forces actually get weaker, like gravity.
The result, an ever-expanding universe.
We will live in an ever-increasingly less populated area as the galaxies around us get further and further apart. Sort of a lonely future for the universe.
If this finding holds up, scientists will have to rethink the theories on how the universe started and how it will end. Russian satellite pictures that used to be top secret are now available to everyone on the internet. The images were taken by Soviet spy satellites back in the Cold War era. A North Carolina company called Aerial Images bought them from the Russian Space Agency and moved them to Raleigh, North Carolina. More photographs are on the way from a Russian satellite launched earlier this month. Aerial Images currently sells pictures of the Earth's surface on CD-ROM or by internet file transfer. Clients include real estate developers, cell phone companies, government agencies, and map makers. Web surfers can browse the company's product for free. Beginning in June, you'll be able to purchase images taken by the new satellite at prices as low as $7.95.
Pictures of downtown Baghdad, taken by a Soviet satellite just after the Gulf War, are being marketed on the World Wide Web by an American company, Aerial Images, Inc. of Raleigh, North Carolina. Aerial Images president, John Hoffman, negotiated a deal with Sovinform Sputnik, a branch of the Russian Space Agency that's putting some of Moscow's former secrets on the internet and putting dollars into Russia's pocket.
I have to tell you, they were very eager to do this.
So eager that the Russians allowed Hoffman to move about 15% of their formerly classified military satellite archive to Raleigh, where it's now safely stored inside a former bank vault. Last week, a Russian-built satellite on board a Russian rocket went aloft from the Baikonur Space Center to take new pictures of the U.S. and other world population centers. 3 more missions are planned before the turn of the century. The satellite returns to Earth next month, and Russian technicians will process the images in the same workrooms that once served the Soviet military satellite network.
The images are received in tape form, and negatives are made from these films. We can then print double positives, or we can create digital files.
Images from the Russian archive are what is known as 2-meter resolution, meaning they reveal objects as small as about 6 feet across. This is Beijing's Tiananmen Square from 120 miles up, and this is traffic on a nearby road.
We can see those cars. We can't tell whether they're Chevrolets or Fords or whatever cars there might be in China, but we can certainly see them.
Aerial Images currently offers paying customers pictures of about 1 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface on CD-ROM or by internet file transfer. Clients include real estate developers, cell phone companies, government agencies, and map makers. Beginning in June, web surfers will be able to browse the company's product for free, purchasing images they want at prices as low as $7.95. Meanwhile, that spy eye view of Baghdad is there now at www.terraserver.com for anyone to see. David George, CNN, Raleigh, North Carolina.
A lunar robot sent by the U.S. space agency NASA has discovered scattered pockets of ice beneath the moon's surface. Scientists say the find will likely have a major impact on space travel.
We can go to the moon and use this water as a propellant to go between the Earth and the moon, which will make manned activities on the moon much less expensive. It's an enabling factor. That's the word we like to use. This will make it much easier to do this. And of course, that fuel can be also used to go on to Mars and elsewhere in the solar system. So this is a tremendous resource that we can use in the exploration of space.
NASA estimates there could be anywhere from 11 to 330 million tons of ice on the moon.
NASA stützt sich auf Daten der Mondsonde Lunar Prospector. Wasservorkommen wären für die Einrichtung einer ständigen Station auf dem Erdtrabanten, die irgendwann einmal kommen soll, von größter Bedeutung.
Auf dem Mond gibt es Wasser. Eine Erkenntnis, deren Konsequenzen wohl erst unsere Enkel so richtig zu schätzen wissen.
Die Mondsonde Lunar Prospector ist fündig geworden. Wasser auf unserem Mond. Milliarden Tonnen Eis könnten sich unter seiner Oberfläche verbergen. Seit Januar hatte die amerikanische Sonde danach gesucht. Über dem Südpol hochgeschleuderte Partikel strömten in die Detektoren und lieferten die Hinweise. Wasser auf dem Mond, diese Entdeckung könnte die Raumforschung revolutionieren. Der Mond könnte nicht nur weiterentdeckt und besiedelt werden, auch der Rest des Sonnensystems stünde uns offen. Menschen könnten auf den Mars und sonst wohin. Mit großen Wasservorräten auf dem Mond ist das viel einfacher. Der Erdtrabant könnte also bald in völlig neuem Licht erscheinen.
One of the most essential elements of life has been found in Earth's closest neighbor.
The United States Space Agency announced Thursday that its Lunar Prospector spacecraft has found icy water on the moon. So much water that a future colony of humans could live there for hundreds of years. CNN's Ann Kellen has more.
From Earth, the moon looks like a barren desert. But NASA scientist Alan Binder says he'll bet his mortgage there is ice at the north and south poles of the moon.
Okay, if I bet my house, the answer is yes. We are certain that water is there. The uncertainty we have is how much.
On board the Lunar Prospector, an instrument called a neutron spectrometer hunted down hydrogen, an element in water. It found evidence of ice mixed in with the soil over thousands of lunar miles, concentrated in shadowed craters, where scientists suspect meteors and comets seeded the moon with the ice.
When we set out, we said, we can find a cup of water in a cubic yard of dirt. We're finding 4 gallons.
Scientists found evidence that there's twice as much ice at the North Pole than South Pole. They say they can't say for sure how much. They guess there's enough to quench the thirst of thousands of humans for hundreds of years.
We are dealing with, let's say, 100 million metric tons. That's equivalent to a lake about 2 miles on a side, 4 square miles, and about 35 feet deep. So that's a lot of water. The implications, of course, are tremendous.
Finding water on the moon for scientists is better than striking gold. Now there's potential to build colonies on the moon, and they say the moon can serve as a refueling station for traveling spacecraft.
You have the water you need, you have the means of making fuels for propulsion, for return to Earth and for going elsewhere. So I think it's a finding of major significance that means we will see an acceleration in the movement of humans out into space.
A very significant rock.
Since the Apollo missions, when man kicked rocks and walked on the moon, scientists have hoped to find water there. But it wasn't until the Clementine mission 5 years ago that water was even suspected. Now scientists are betting their ranch on it and will gather more information over the next 11 months as the Lunar Prospector gets a closer look at the moon's surface. Ann Kellen, CNN reporting. Our moon is not the only moon in the news this week. New images of Jupiter's moon, Europa, have scientists fascinated. They add weight to the theory that Europa has a liquid ocean under its icy crust. The pictures taken by the Galileo spacecraft show a crater that may have been filled with water. They also reveal huge chunks of ice and iceberg-like objects stuck in the frozen slush. One reason the findings are intriguing is that water plus warmth might provide the conditions for life to exist on Europa. Fallout from El Nino stretches from coast to coast in the United States. A hillside in Laguna Niguel, California, drenched by rains a few weeks ago, collapsed Thursday, demolishing 2 homes and damaging several condominiums. And there's no relief in sight, according to the latest long-range forecast from the National Weather Service.
Probably through the end of April, we'll continue to have the possibility of more heavy precipitation in California and the Southwest, and even into the Southeast.
In South Georgia, most rivers are still near the overflow stage after heavy flooding last week. Over the next 3 months, forecasters predict it will be colder than normal from the southwestern United States to the East Coast, including northern Florida, while the Dakotas, the Great Lakes, and New England will be drier than usual this spring. In May, June, and July, expect warmer than normal temperatures in the west, from Arizona to western Montana. And it will be colder than normal in the southern Mississippi Valley, from Alabama to eastern Montana, and warmer than normal in New England. It will be rainier than usual in the Dakotas east to Michigan. Forecasters say El Nino may have a positive effect, reducing the number of Atlantic hurricanes this summer and fall as it did last year. They say it's too early to accurately predict next winter's forecast, but for now,
It's almost certain that we're not going to see next winter an El Nino of anything like the magnitude that we've seen this year, if we see one at all. For the time being, the forecast for next winter calls for subnormal temperatures in the northern middle part of the country, above normal temperatures in the western part of the United States.
forecasters say they'll have a better idea what the winter will bring in the next month or two.
Bei vielen war heute Morgen die Verwirrung wieder komplett. Es war der Beginn der Sommerzeit. Die meisten Bürger verstehen ja nicht ganz, was da wie gerechnet wird. Deshalb wollen wir es noch einmal nachträglich erklären. Also, die Uhren wurden in der Nacht um 1 Stunde vorgestellt. Das heißt, um 2 Uhr war es plötzlich 3 Uhr. Das wiederum bedeutet, dass 60 Minuten fehlen. Sie haben also 1 Stunde weniger Schlaf bekommen. Sollten Sie Ihre Uhren übrigens nicht umgestellt haben, dann ist es bei Ihnen 1 Stunde früher, als es in Wirklichkeit ist. Das bedeutet, Sie sind 1 Stunde zu spät dran. Jetzt aber los. Sollten Sie Ihre Uhren aber ordnungsgemäß umgestellt haben, dann ist heute die Sonne 60 Minuten später aufgegangen. Es blieb also länger dunkel als gestern. Doch das hat nichts zu bedeuten, denn im Gegenzug bleibt es ab jetzt abends 1 Stunde länger hell. Das bleibt jetzt bis zum 25. Oktober so, dann werden die Uhren wieder um 1 Stunde zurückgestellt. Das heißt, dann werden Sie wieder 1 Stunde länger schlafen können. Sie können das auch gern selbst nochmal nachrechnen, aber bis dahin ist es längst wieder dunkel und da Sie heute 1 Stunde weniger haben, sollten Sie uns einfach vertrauen und die Zeit anderweitig nutzen.
Damit dürften ja wohl alle Klarheiten beseitigt sein, oder? Nun zugegeben, das Ganze ist wirklich eine komplexe Materie, aber dafür gibt es ja unsere Bildungsoffensive. Sie wissen, jede Woche suchen wir uns Begriffe raus, die einen besonderen Erklärungsbedarf haben. In dieser Woche sind wir beim Wort Sommerzeit mit unserem Latein am Ende.
Sommerzeit, für alle, die es immer noch nicht verstanden haben. Bei der Sommerzeit geht es darum, längere Tage zu erhalten, was aber so gar nicht stimmt, weil man dafür nämlich 1 Stunde weniger schlafen kann. Die Uhren wurden in der Nacht um 1 Stunde vorgestellt. Wenn Sie also heute Morgen zu einer bestimmten Uhrzeit aufstehen mussten, dann durften Sie 1 Stunde früher aus den Federn als gestern zur gleichen Zeit. Wenn Sie jedoch heute genauso lang geschlafen haben, dann sind Sie 1 Stunde später aufgestanden. Eigentlich ganz einfach, oder? Übrigens war es heute Morgen um 7 Uhr dunkler als gestern um 7 Uhr, denn eigentlich war es heute Morgen um 7 Uhr erst 6 Uhr und das ganz unabhängig davon, ob Sie nun Ihre Uhren umgestellt haben oder nicht. Dafür bleibt es aber seit heute 1 Stunde länger hell. Das heißt, wenn Sie heute 1 Stunde später aufgestanden sind, können Sie die Sonne trotzdem genauso lang genießen wie gestern. Sind Sie allerdings heute zur gleichen Uhrzeit aufgewacht wie gestern, also 1 Stunde früher, dann haben Sie zwar weniger geschlafen, aber dafür haben Sie auch 1 Stunde mehr Sonne. Das bleibt bis zum Oktober so, dann werden die Uhren wieder um 1 Stunde zurückgestellt. Sie erhalten dann also 1 Stunde mehr Schlaf, aber dafür wird es dann auch wieder früher dunkel.
Ich muss das an dieser Stelle wirklich mal sagen, also der Redakteur dieser Sendung heißt Cliff Fullerton.
Ja.
Können Sie sich vorstellen, wenn Sie das so hören, dass man den Mann wirklich manchmal wirklich...
bleiben Sie doch ganz
ich habe doch gar
ruhig.
keine Ahnung, wie das funktioniert. Schon seit Jahren verstehe ich das Thema nicht. Danach überhaupt nicht mehr.
Ich vermute, dass Herr Fullerton eine andere Karriere plant, nämlich eine in der Politik. Er hat nämlich eben bewiesen, das ist eine völlig einfache Sache. Wenn man sie so oft wiederholt, wie er es eben versucht hat, so verwirrend ist, dass am Ende die Leute glauben, Cliff Fullerton sei nötig, um das Problem zu verstehen.
Ja, der Mann hat, also mich hat der Mann um 10 Jahre zurückgeworfen. Ich dachte, dieses Jahr könnte ich das endlich mal verstehen, dass es schon wieder eine Chance vertan.
Und dann frage ich Sie, warum Sie immer noch Steuern zahlen für Politiker, die nur dasselbe tun, was Cliff Fullerton eben gemacht hat.
Das sollten wir an dieser Stelle nicht weiter vertiefen. Wir beenden diese Sendung und sagen bis nächste Woche.
This week, NASA successfully launched a satellite called TRACE, designed to study the sun.
3, 2, 1, drop.
TRACE hurled into space aboard a Pegasus rocket that was dropped from an airplane over Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. TRACE stands for Transition Region and Coronal Explorer. Its mission is to examine the sun's atmosphere, particularly the corona, the super hot halo of gas that surrounds the sun. Bubbles of charged particles erupt periodically from the corona and can disrupt power transmission and satellite communications here on Earth. Scientists hope information from the TRACE satellite will help them better understand and predict these coronal mass ejections, as they're called.
Am bisher einzigen warmen Wochenende dieses Frühlings hatten wir Europäer nicht nur blauen Himmel über unseren Köpfen, sondern ein veritables Ozonloch. Wissenschaftler haben es mit dem Umweltsatelliten ERS-2 entdeckt, vermessen und in sogenannten Falschfarbenbildern sichtbar gemacht. 24. März. Weit draußen auf dem Atlantik, die Ozonschicht wird dünner und dünner, ein Loch entsteht und wandert ostwärts über die Küsten von Frankreich, Spanien und Großbritannien, über uns hinweg Richtung Osten. Am 28. und 29. März, einem strahlend schönen Wochenende, ist die Ozonschicht über Deutschland nur noch hauchdünn. Aus der Perspektive des Satelliten sieht das fast ebenso bedrohlich aus wie das große Ozonloch in der Antarktis. Das europäische Ozonloch ist aber viel kleiner und auch auf andere Art entstanden als sein großer Bruder.
Ja, dieses Phänomen lässt sich erst einmal nicht mit dem Ozonloch über der Antarktis vergleichen. Das sind zwei verschiedene Phänomene. Das Ozonloch über der Antarktis kommt im Wesentlichen durch Chemie zustande, durch chemische Prozesse, chemische Abbauprozesse von Ozon. Und dieses Ozon-Miniloch über Europa ist im Wesentlichen ein dynamischer Prozess, das heißt ein Transportprozess. Durch Vermischung mit ozonreicheren Luftschichten wird dieses Ozonminimum geschlossen.
Wer in diesen Tagen unten auf der Erde das Gefühl hatte, ein wenig schneller als sonst Farbe zu bekommen, mag dennoch recht haben. Denn auch durch das kleine Ozonloch dringt mehr ultraviolette Strahlung als gewöhnlich zum Erdboden. Richtig gefährlich ist das nicht, denn die Sonne steht noch ziemlich tief und noch denkt niemand an stundenlange Sonnenbäder.
Das heißt natürlich, wenn man jetzt längere Zeit in der Sonne verbracht hat, wäre natürlich auch die Gefahr eines Sonnenbrandes höher gewesen.
Alle 3 Tage liefert der Umweltsatellit eine neue aktuelle Ozonkarte der ganzen Erde. Darauf war über Europa schon in den vergangenen 2 Jahren um diese Zeit ein ähnliches Phänomen zu sehen. Gab es dieses Frühlingsozonloch bei uns vielleicht schon immer, ohne dass man davon wusste? Schließlich heißt es im Volksmund seit langem, mit Sonne im Märzen ist nicht gut scherzen.
Das Phänomen ist durchaus nichts Ungewöhnliches. Es hat es auch in der Vergangenheit schon in unregelmäßigen Abständen gegeben. Was allerdings bemerkenswert ist, dass wir in der letzten Zeit dieses Phänomen häufiger festgestellt haben und darum müssen wir auch diese Sache weiterhin beobachten.
Anfang April lag es noch über dem Schwarzen Meer, das Loch. Jetzt ist es weg, verwirbelt durch ozonreiche Luft wieder aufgefüllt. Falls es über die Feiertage doch noch schön werden sollte, ein Tipp. Eincremen schadet nicht. Vielleicht ist das nächste Ozonloch schon unterwegs.
Stürmen im Süden der USA ist die Zahl der Toten auf mindestens 44 angestiegen. Über 180 Menschen wurden verletzt. Die schlimmsten Schäden richteten die Tornados in Alabama an. US-Präsident Clinton rief in Teilen des Staates den Notstand aus. Weitere Einzelheiten von Christoph Lang.
Der 6-jährige Brandon inmitten der Trümmer seines Elternhauses. Er erzählt, dass er von seinen 7 Hundewelpen bisher nur eines lebend wiedergefunden hat. Überall gibt es jetzt solche Geschichten in den Gebieten, die die Tornados am heftigsten getroffen haben. Besonders schlimm ist die Lage im Jefferson County in Alabama. Manche Orte sehen hier aus wie nach einem Bombenangriff. Ich kann es nicht glauben, dass wir da rausgekommen sind, sagt dieser Mann, der einen Gottesdienst besucht hatte, als die Sturmwarnung kam. Die Kirche brach zusammen, die Menschen überlebten in einem Vorgebäude, das intakt blieb. Nur ihre Autos wurden von den Tornados in einen Graben gefegt. Um die 400 Stundenkilometer waren die Wirbelstürme schnell und gehörten damit zur schlimmsten von 5 Kategorien. Wir müssen das Vorwarnsystem weiter verbessern, fordert US-Vizepräsident Al Gore, der zur Stunde das Katastrophengebiet besucht. Alle stimmen überein, dass das Tornado-Warnsystem eine noch schlimmere Katastrophe verhindert hat. Dass viele ihren Besitz verloren, nicht aber ihr Leben, ist den Sirenen zu verdanken, die rechtzeitig das nahende Unheil ankündigten.
A new discovery suggests that life may exist on other planets. The Infrared Space Observatory has detected water vapor in the atmosphere of the Saturn's largest moon, Titan. Scientists have also identified ice on the moons of both Earth and Jupiter. They believe that where there's water, there could be life. For Daybreak, Paul Murden from the British National Space Centre discusses the findings. First of all, when we talk about water around planets and stars, are we talking about water surrounding these planets, or are they just actual water in the middle of space?
All of these things. Is the water is on all of the planets that the Infrared Space Observatory has looked at. It's around stars, it's in the space between the stars, and it's in other galaxies outside of our own.
And when you discovered this, how significant was it for you to discover that the existence of this water so close to the end of really the mission?
Well, the mission has built up evidence of water throughout the 2-year lifetime in all these different circumstances. I mean, we expected that there was water in space. Water is hydrogen and oxygen, and those are common in space and combined together. They like each other and they combine together to make water. So we expected to see a lot of it. I think what we failed to imagine were the variety of circumstances in which we would find it.
And can you elaborate on that just a little?
Well, it seems to be a key material in the way in which stars form. The stars are dusty, gassy stuff that draw together in the galaxy and make a big lump, which then fires up and makes a sun. Mm-hmm. And in the course of all of that, water and dust and debris gets spread out around the star and eventually turns into a planetary system. And in fact, in our own solar system, the icy material, the ice, the water that was left over as a byproduct of this process that made the sun, this icy material is in the outer parts of the solar system and from time to time falls down towards the sun, and then we call that a comet.
And this is how we have actually got water on our planet, because of comets, we think.
Yes, the original water, which probably was here right at the very beginning of the formation of the Earth, has all got boiled away by the heat of the sun. But comets falling back on the Earth have put that water back. And so this is this glass of water here is a melted comet from billions of years ago, some anonymous comet that impacted the Earth all that time back.
What personally is the most exciting aspect of this discovery for you?
Well, astronomers have known for quite a while about the existence of other planets. There are, something like 12 currently known outside of our own solar system. So they know about the stage in the universe on which life can evolve, right? They have the sort of platform, other planets that life can happen on. And now we have evidence that one of the major ingredients of life and the origin of life is present on these stages. What you need to do is to add organic chemicals to the water, and you need to warm it up a little bit, and life will evolve out of that.
And that really is how life began.
Yes.
And you'll be able to take the water that you discover in space and be able to create conditions to find out how life began?
Well, intellectually, yes. I mean, I think what we're doing is understanding how that life happened. I mean, if you have dirty water, yes, and you heat it with some sort of energy from a sun or something, then that's the way you cook up life. Life will evolve out of that, given a few billion years.
Of course. Paul Merton, thank you very much indeed.
Our 7-member crew traveled to Kennedy Space Center using NASA T-38s to start the launch activities about 4 days prior to launch. You can see the vehicle assembly building and the shuttle landing facility in the background of that shot. Our 5 airplanes flew over the pad as we arrived down there to take a look at our orbiter as it sat out on the pad before our mission. And then came into for a landing at the 15,000-foot shuttle landing facility runway, the same landing strip that we hope to be landing our shuttle on at the end of our mission. After landing, we taxied in and met the press at Kennedy Space Center for our first press event.
Today's scheduled liftoff has been delayed 24 hours. The problem is a faulty piece of communications equipment vital for the launch. The 17-day mission will study the human brain and nervous system.
This is the mission commander, Rick Searfoss, an Air Force colonel, on his 3rd mission and 1st as mission commander. Scott Altman, a Navy commander, making his first flight into space. Rick Linehan, a NASA veterinarian astronaut, is a payload commander and on his 2nd flight. Kay Heyer, MS-2, the flight engineer of the mission, will be making her 1st flight. Dave Williams, the Canadian astronaut, also on his 1st flight. Dave is an emergency physician. Jay Bucky, PS1, a medical doctor on loan from Dartmouth Medical School. This is Jim Powelczyk, a physician from Penn State, also making his 1st flight with Neurolab. Finally, on launch day, the shuttle was ready to go and the crew made their traditional walkout from crew quarters as they boarded the Astrovan to take them to the pad for strap into the vehicle. We climbed into the vehicle about 2 hours prior to launch and waited for time to go, closed and locked our visors as the moment approached. 10 seconds prior to launch, the water suppression system is activated and the engines come online. Then at T-0, the solid rocket boosters kick off and there's no doubt in any of our minds that we are going into space. In this in-cabin video view, you can see how things start shaking as those solid rocket boosters light off. The feeling of acceleration was incredible as we headed up and accelerated faster and faster. It was a beautiful day at Kennedy Space Center, just a gorgeous way to start the mission. At about 2 minutes into the mission, the solid rocket boosters have expended most of their thrust and are jettisoned. You can see the flash outside the windows as the solid rocket boosters come off. This onboard view shows the solid rockets detaching. As their motors fire from the nose cone, you can see the exhaust as it goes out of sight. This happens at about 170,000 feet. As I said, 2 minutes into the mission, doing a little better than twice the speed of sound. The solids come back down to Earth and are actually reused for the next flight. At main engine cutoff, 8.5 minutes into the mission, you can see us all pitch forward as we're now in 0G for the first time in the mission. Shortly after that, we jettison the external tank. It actually re-enters the atmosphere and burns up over the Indian Ocean, is the only piece that is not reused. Here you can see the external tank starting to vent off the oxygen and hydrogen propellant that's left on board as it re-enters the atmosphere. This is some
Shuttle Columbia on a mission
Crickets, rats, snails, and the latest U.S. Space Shuttle crew are off and flying. The Space Shuttle Columbia blasted off its pad on Friday on a mission to test the effects of spaceflight on the human brain. The crew will use animals to help find ways for humans to avoid the pitfalls of long periods in space. Columbia's launch was postponed on Thursday after a signal processor malfunctioned.
Eintägiger Verspätung ist die US-Raumfähre Columbia zu einem rund zweiwöchigen Flug ins All gestartet. An Bord befinden sich 7 Astronauten und mehr als 2000 Kleintiere, darunter Schlangen, Mäuse und Ratten. An ihnen soll erforscht werden, wie das Nervensystem in der Schwerelosigkeit reagiert. 4 Experimente werden unter deutscher Leitung durchgeführt. Der ursprünglich für gestern geplante Start musste wegen eines fehlerhaften Prozessors verschoben werden. Schwere Wirbelstürme haben zum 2. Mal innerhalb einer Woche den Südosten der USA heimgesucht. Besonders betroffen war unter anderem die Stadt Nashville, die zum Katastrophengebiet erklärt wurde. Der Tornado schlug eine Schneise der Verwüstung, rund 100 Menschen wurden verletzt. Ein Großteil der Innenstadt war ohne Strom. Schulen und städtische Einrichtungen blieben geschlossen. In Arkansas und Kentucky rissen die Stürme 11 Menschen in den Tod.
Die amerikanische Raumfähre Columbia ist heute von Cape Canaveral aus zu einer 16-tägigen Forschungsreise ins All gestartet. Mit an Bord sind neben 7 Astronauten mehr als 2000 Ratten, Heuschrecken und Schnecken. An ihnen wollen die Wissenschaftler die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit auf das Nervensystem testen.
Der Start der Columbia war um 24 Stunden verschoben worden, weil an Bord ein Kommunikationsgerät ausgefallen war. Doch heute verlief alles nach Plan. Pünktlich um 20:19 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit hob die Raumfähre ab. Während der 16-tägigen Mission will die Besatzung im sogenannten Neurolab insgesamt 26 Experimente durchführen. Neben den Tieren müssen auch die Astronauten als Versuchskaninchen herhalten. Unter anderem soll einer der Männer eine 3,2 Millionen Mark teure Unterdruckhose tragen. Mit dem Hightech-Beinkleid sollen neue Erkenntnisse über das Herz-Kreislauf-Verhalten in der Schwerelosigkeit gewonnen werden. Ob das 25-jährige Space Lab-Programm nach dieser Mission zu Ende geht, ist noch unklar. Eine Entscheidung darüber soll noch vor dem 3. Mai fallen.
When we come back, the Space Shuttle Columbia and its orbiting menagerie.
2, 1. And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia on a mission expanding our knowledge.
With 7 astronauts and a cast of thousands on board, the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia began a 2-week mission on Friday. The astronauts are concentrating on science during this mission, in particular how the brain and central nervous system adapt and develop in weightlessness. Helping the astronauts in their mission, which has been called Neurolab, are more than 2,000 mice, rats, fish, snails, and crickets, none of which is old enough to chirp. The U.S. Space Agency NASA says it hopes the results of this mission will assist in planning trips to Mars and future colonies on the moon.
Um 21:19 Uhr unserer Zeit ist sie, Verzeihung, um 20:19 Uhr unserer Zeit ist sie gestartet. Das Shuttle sollte ursprünglich bereits gestern zur voraussichtlich letzten Space Lab-Mission starten. Die Reise musste jedoch wegen technischer Probleme auf heute verschoben werden. Über 1500 Grillen, einige Mäuse sowie Schlangen, Schnecken, Fliegen und Fische mussten sich eben einen weiteren Tag gedulden, bevor es heute nun aufwärts ging in die Umlaufbahn. Die Space Lab-Mission feiert heuer ihr 25-jähriges Jubiläum. Eckhard Querner berichtet.
Die schöne Aussicht genießen, dafür dürften die 7 Spacelab-Astronauten wohl kaum Zeit haben, denn die Tage im All sind ausgefüllt mit Experimenten. Im Mittelpunkt der Mission stehen die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit auf das Nervensystem, das unter anderem Blutdruck, Gleichgewichtssinn und Schlafverhalten steuert. Mit Hilfe von Sinnesorganen im Innenohr lenkt das Nervensystem die Orientierung von Körper und Bewegung. Diese Funktion kann man indirekt durch die Beobachtung von Augenbewegungen untersuchen. Die unter den Bedingungen der Schwerelosigkeit gewonnenen Erkenntnisse sollen auch zur Diagnose und Therapie von Krankheiten dienen. 4 der 26 Experimente werden von deutschen Forschern geleitet. 1973 war Deutschland mit Spacelab in die bemannte Raumfahrt eingestiegen. Ulf Merbold war im Jahr 83 der erste Bundesdeutsche, der ins All flog. Seitdem hat die Wissenschaft durch die Schwerelosigkeit zahlreiche positive Erkenntnisse gewonnen, zum Beispiel in Physik und Medizin. Die deutsche Beteiligung an der vorläufig letzten Spacelab-Mission dürfte ein wichtiger Schritt zur Vorbereitung der internationalen Raumstation ISS sein. Mit deren Aufbau soll im Herbst begonnen werden.
Let her in and move away from the glass.
Sorry, I'm here's retired for first.
And now inside of the church here, which was devastated by that same tornado. As you walk in, there are three words: faith, hope, and charity. This parish and this community is surviving on all three tonight. Judy?
Martin Savage in Nashville, Tennessee. Just unbelievable pictures. Thursday's tornadoes were the latest in a series of deadly storms to hit 9 southern states since February. CNN's Alan Duke spoke with some youngsters in the state of Georgia about how they are coping.
Oh my God, Zach, it's a tornado! Charlie!
With more than the usual number of deadly tornadoes across the South this year, people are nervous.
I actually had a dream a tornado took me away last night.
Let me put it this way. The other night, my dog and I slept in the closet in the basement.
Fifth graders at Atlanta's Margaret Mitchell Elementary are afraid.
And I feel scared because most of the time we don't really know. Because some tornadoes are silent, and they can just occur anytime. It makes me feel scared because so many other families are getting hit by them, and some of them are killed. And I start wondering about how would they start their living again, how would they earn their money and clothing again.
Their principal is worried too and has added more tornado drills.
They don't know when or if it will happen. It's just something that's in their mind at all times.
And these students have been listening to lessons about what to do if a tornado approaches.
I would alert everyone and head for the basement and then make sure everyone's there.
Because they said it's best to go down to the ground instead of up high.
I just remember to be calm and not to panic during a tornado, because then all the panicking won't result in anything.
Fulton County, which surrounds Atlanta, is considering reinstalling a siren warning system or giving incentives to people to buy weather alert radios.
They're very inexpensive. They retail at about $40, and considering that it can save your life and your home, that's a pretty small investment.
But good luck finding a weather radio on store shelves. There's been a rush on them in recent weeks. Radio Shack is scrambling to meet the demand.
We're tapping into New York, California, Utah, Nevada. They're shipping them in as fast as they can.
Having a weather radio has kept many Southerners awake recent nights, listening to the many watches and warnings issued.
Tornadoes are especially unnerving because they seem to strike so randomly. And no matter what you do to protect your family and home, there's still a feeling of helplessness. Alan Duke, CNN, Atlanta.
I went outside and I just saw the cloud.
Oh my God, Zach, it's a tornado! Charlie!
Regina Vaughn is the eye in a storm. Her video camera rolling, she will capture both the power and the fear of one of nature's most frightening events.
Let's go!
And when I realized it was a tornado, I grabbed my son and started running to get to the basement. And I was calling for my other son, Charlie.
A mother begins the desperate search for her oldest child, while her youngest one frantically searches for shoes.
Help! Help me help! Where's my shoes? Where's my...
And of course, we were a bit panicked. We were very frightened.
Even with the camera thrown over her shoulder, shooting the ground, the video is compelling. It has the power to pull you into the moment.
And I got Zach in the basement, and I'm still looking for Charlie. And when I came around the side of the house, I saw the tornado moving along this side, so I got a little more footage of it. And that's Zach calling, let's go. He was afraid to be under there by himself.
I was scared.
How come?
Because I didn't want to get killed by a tornado, so I just started going to the basement because I didn't want to get killed. So I was really scared.
Charlie had been in a neighbor's house and heard his mother's desperate cries.
Well, the wind was blowing really hard next door, so I looked outside and it was raining hard, and then my mom, I heard her screaming, so I ran home, and she goes, "Did you see that?"
That's when the only thought I had was finding him and getting him in a safe place. Those were the only thoughts I had. I was scared. I was terrified.
What makes Regina Vaughn's home video so unique is that watching it, no matter where you are, you feel the terror, too. Martin Savage, CNN, Nashville.
Now it's time to open up the payload bay doors and get down to work. The payload bay doors are actually radiators that help reject heat into space, the heat that's produced by all the equipment and experiments that we have on board. You can see the space lab in the background there in the left corner of the picture. That'll be our home while we're doing all our experiments for the next 16 days. We deployed the KU band, which is the antenna that handles the high data transmission rate for the video and high bandwidth data that needs to go back and forth to the ground. Now it's time for Rick and Dave to open the hatches and get ready to activate the space lab.
This shows the inside of the space lab, and this is where we're going to be doing the 26 experiments that we have on the mission. Rick and Dave had the job to come on in and get it activated, to get the power on. Here's the tunnel actually that connects to the space lab. The space lab sits so far back in the payload bay, and that's the tunnel that we go through in order to get into the space lab. Their job is to get the power on, the lights on, and get it ready for starting with the activities there. You can see once it gets going, it's a pretty busy place. We have at least 3 experiments going on here right now. In the back is a rotating chair, but then here at the bottom is a study looking at blood pressure control. You can see Dave is inside that silver tank, and also here's our commander, Rick Searfoss, is also participating in one of these experiments, looking at how the blood pressure control system changes when you're in space. Down at the bottom left here, you can see that Jim is working inside that silver canister called an LBMP tank, and he's actually doing something for the first time ever in space. He's doing what's called microneurography. On the ground, the investigators are watching this pretty closely because this was the first time, and they were pretty excited to see if it would work out. And when Jim got that nerve in the tracings, they were pretty excited. This is the rotating chair. And this is used for studying another system that's affected by being in space, and that's the balance system. This gives you a little sense about how fast the chair rotates once it gets going. And just keep in mind, however, when you're rotating in the chair, you actually don't see out. What you have instead is cameras looking at your eye movements, and these show the eye movements when you're rotating in the chair, and by studying those eye movements, the investigators can get a sense on how the balance system has changed from being in space. The chair also goes in different positions. Before you saw it sitting upright, and that was lying on the back. These experiments didn't just take place in space, they also took place before and after the mission. Here's Scott doing the ball catch experiment. This was part of the baseline data collection before the mission. You can see he has apparatus on there that's measuring the activities in his muscles when he catches the ball. This shows the markers on the hand that's used for measuring the ball catch. And here he is doing it in space. And here it's a lot different because the ball is falling at a constant speed rather than constantly accelerating as it does on the ground. And there's the catch. We also use virtual reality to get a sense of how our sense of orientation changed in space. Inside this virtual reality helmet, you see a scene that's rotating. And it turns out that when you look at this scene, you actually start to get a sense that you're rotating rather than that the room is rotating. And we noticed that that was more profound in space. We were also looking at how control of movement changed, and this is the visual motor coordination facility that looks at how our control of movements and simple movements like grasping and pointing change. Lung function also changes in space, and this is Dave working on a pulmonary experiment from the University of California at San Diego. We weren't the only animals being studied on the mission. We also had rats, mice, fish, snails, and on the mission. And here's a cage transfer. We're taking some rats over to the general purpose workstation to see how they've adapted to being in space. And we're going to show two experiments that we did in the workstation. The first one used what's called Escher staircase. And this shows one of the prints from M.C. Escher, and if you look at that staircase, you see it's a little confusing about what's up and what's down. The Escher staircase we had in the workstation looked like this, and it turns out that when a rat walks on this maze, they are actually making 3 90-degree turns, but they come back to the same starting point. And this can help understand how their brain is controlling their sense of orientation. This display actually shows nerve cells in the brain firing when they get to certain locations. We also had rats that were learning to walk in space, and you can see this rat here is using its front legs, and this one is just enjoying floating around. And they adapted pretty much the way we did, since we tended to use our arms and float around too when we were out in the space lab. This is a picture of an oyster toadfish, and it turns out that the balance system of fish isn't all that different from that of humans. And by studying nerve impulses from the fish, you can get some insights into how the balance system is working. Here, Kay is giving some accelerations to the aquarium where the toadfish was. We also had crickets on board, 2,000 crickets, and here Scott is looking at these crickets. Some of them are in a centrifuge that you saw spinning around there, and others are floating around in the weightlessness of space. They actually have gravity sensors, and you can see what happens to gravity sensors when they develop in space.
Nach ihrem erfolgreichen Start hat die Besatzung der US-Raumfähre Columbia mit den ersten Versuchen begonnen. Im Mittelpunkt diesmal die Erforschung des Nervensystems in der Schwerelosigkeit. Bei der zweiwöchigen Mission ist das europäische Weltraumlabor Spacelab zum letzten Mal im Einsatz.
24-stündiger Verspätung ist die US-Raumfähre Columbia zu ihrer 16-tägigen Mission von Cape Canaveral ins All gestartet. Mit an Bord sind 2000 Kleintiere. An ihnen sollen die 7 Astronauten untersuchen, wie Schwerelosigkeit Nervensysteme von Lebewesen beeinflusst.
Zum Beispiel werden mit speziellen Handschuhen sämtliche Bewegungen aufgezeichnet. Man will die motorischen Fähigkeiten in der Schwerelosigkeit untersuchen. Für weitere Experimente sind 18 trächtige Mäuse, 152 Ratten sowie Grillen, Fische und Schnecken an Bord der Columbia. Die Mission wurde von Experten aus Deutschland, Italien und Frankreich konzipiert.
You can see where it completely destroyed probably at least a quarter mile of the Pacific Coast Highway.
Researchers on board this Twin Otter plane are spending a month mapping 700 miles of coast from California to Washington, surveying millions of dollars in homes and land washed to sea by this winter's El Niño storms. Scientists want to compare what the coastline looks like now to this 3D map taken before the El Niño storms.
The idea is to compare the two surveys to figure out how the form and the position of the coast has changed due to the severe storms we've had.
The sharp line of a lack of vegetation shows the extent of the slide.
These camera views out the plane window give a two-dimensional view of roads near Big Sur washed away by storms. Other instruments on board will give a 3D view. Laser beams bouncing from the plane and back precisely measure the elevation of the nooks and crannies along the coast to get 3D images like this. This mapping technology recently debuted on a mission to Mars.
The Mars Global Surveyor is in orbit around Mars, and it's using the same type of laser technology.
This space-age technology won't repair the damage done on Earth by the storms, but researchers hope it may help prevent future loss.
The primary benefit is to understand where we're going to build in the future. We have problems all across the country where we build too close to an eroding shoreline, both houses, beach cottages, infrastructure of communities.
A lot of the beaches are just, you know,
partially or totally eroded away. We fully expect those beaches to recover, though, and come back. That sand is just temporarily resting offshore, and it'll be back when the summer waves push it all back.
The cliffs won't, though.
The cliffs won't be back.
Once researchers finish analyzing northern and southern California, this plane heads to Oregon and Washington to map the coastline there. And once the data is collected, it will take about 2 months to make the 3D comparison of the West Coast before and after the winter's El Nino storms. Ann Kellen, CNN, Monterey, California.
Große Brocken lösen sich von den Eisbergen und werden zu unkontrollierbarem Treibeis. Klimaforscher haben festgestellt, in den vergangenen 50 Jahren ist es in der Antarktis rund 2,5 Grad wärmer geworden. Die Folge: ein gigantisches Naturschauspiel, für das Umweltschützer den Treibhauseffekt verantwortlich machen.
Das Drohende dabei ist, dass wir nicht nur die Gletscher abschmelzen, sondern dass wir zunehmend Wetterextreme haben, Hurricanes und Überschwemmungen.
Das Klima ist aus dem Gleichgewicht geraten, in der Antarktis besonders im Norden. Hier liegt auch das sogenannte Schelf Larsen B mit rund 12.000 Quadratkilometern, fast so groß wie Schleswig-Holstein. Dieses Gebiet wird von Wissenschaftlern seit Februar genau beobachtet. 2/3 der Eisfläche soll schon brüchig sein. Tiefe Risse haben sich gebildet. Die Experten befürchten jetzt, dass sich die gigantische Scholle ganz vom Festland lösen könnte und ins Südpolarmeer driftet. Australische Antarktisforscher sind davon überzeugt, dass die größte Eisfläche der Welt in rund 500 Jahren ganz verschwunden sein wird. Dadurch würde sich das Klima entscheidend verändern.
Each orbit of the Earth took 90 minutes. So every 45 minutes we had a sunrise or a sunset. In between performing all the experiment activities, we had to take care of daily activities such as exercising to try and stay in shape while we were on orbit for 16 days. And of course just cleaning up and general chores such as washing your hair and also shaving and taking care of brushing your teeth and things like that just took a little bit longer in space since we had the challenge of performing these activities without gravity. Every now and then, if we did have a spare moment or two, it was pretty fun to take advantage of practicing the laws of physics with the lack of gravity. And we also had a challenge every time we went to go eat. So we had to gather all of our food up, the majority of which was dehydrated food that we added water to in our galley and put into our oven, used scissors to open the special packages, and then would just pull the food out and eat that with just regular utensils. And it didn't really matter if you were on the floor or on the ceiling. Another interesting thing that happens on orbit is you actually grow taller as the effect of gravity is no longer there on your spine. Some crew members as much as 2 inches, and here we're taking turns measuring that growth. Another experiment performed were sleep studies, where we have this neural net on to measure brain waves, as well as a special suit that has instrumentation that measures chest wall movement for respiration recording, and a special data recorder that's miniaturized that is actually worn on the subject to record all the signals while they sleep.
Dutzende Wasserschnecken, Pflanzen und Mikroorganismen fliegen an Bord der Columbia 17 Tage durchs All. Aber mit dürfen nur die friedlichsten Fische, die zänkischen, bleiben auf der Erde.
Wir selektieren letztendlich dann diese unverträglichen Weiber aus und probieren so lange, bis wir eine harmonische Crew haben.
Das Aquarium wird in einen wasserdichten Behälter verpackt und quasi im Wohnzimmer der Raumfähre Columbia installiert, wo die Astronauten per Video kontrollieren können, wie sich die Tiere in der Schwerelosigkeit verhalten. Langfristig wollen die Bochumer Wissenschaftler mit diesem Experiment die Produktion von Sauerstoff und die Aufbereitung von Schmutzwasser im All ermöglichen. An den Skeletten der Fische soll nach der Landung außerdem untersucht werden, in welcher Form die Schwerelosigkeit den Körperbau beeinflusst oder verändert. Mit dem zweiten deutschen Experiment werden die Koordination von Hand- und Augenbewegung sowie die Veränderung der Reaktionszeit in der Schwerelosigkeit getestet. Die Astronauten müssen Lichtpunkten folgen oder nach Scheiben greifen. Die Daten werden jeweils von einem Computer aufgezeichnet. Hier trainiert der amerikanische Astronaut Richard Searfoss den Test noch einmal vor dem Start. Freitag, einen Tag später als geplant, hieß es dann startfrei für die Columbia. Ein defektes Modul des Navigationssystems war ausgetauscht worden und um 20:19 Uhr starteten die 7 Astronauten mit dem Weltraumzoo ins All.
1. And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia on a mission expanding our knowledge and understanding of the human nervous system.
Die Raumfähre Columbia soll nach ihrer Mission voraussichtlich am 4. Mai wieder in Cape Canaveral landen.
Muss wegen des Ausfalls der Luftreinigungsanlage möglicherweise ihre Mission vorzeitig abbrechen. Die Bodenkontrolle in Cape Canaveral teilte mit, eine unmittelbare Gefahr für die Besatzung bestehe zurzeit nicht. Sollte der Schaden aber nicht behoben werden können, müssten die 7 Astronauten Mitte nächster Woche zur Erde zurückkehren, 4 Tage früher als geplant.
A device which removes carbon dioxide from the air within Columbia failed Friday, forcing the crew to use unrecyclable canisters to cleanse the air. That backup system won't hold out until May 3rd or 4th when the shuttle is due back on Earth. The 7 astronauts were given the go-ahead to try to fix the unit. If they can't make the repairs, they'll have to return to Earth sometime this week. Astronauts on board the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia have encountered an unforeseen problem, one that could force them to return to Earth days earlier than they had planned. The spacecraft's air cleansing system has failed, leaving it dependent on a backup plan. But the astronauts do hope to repair the system. More now from CNN's Miles O'Brien.
There was an air of playfulness when the crew of Columbia checked in with the orbiting space station Mir on Saturday.
Why don't you come over and drop by the house here and we'll have a bit of talk and swap some stories. Over.
Well, that sounds good. Maybe we can put a few shrimp on the barbie. Over.
I don't think we want to have a barbecue up here.
But the quality of the air up there is no laughing matter. So when the primary system, which removes carbon dioxide from the oldest shuttle, failed, Houston knew it had a mission-threatening problem. Ground controllers ordered the crew to activate lithium hydroxide canisters, which serve as backup carbon dioxide scrubbers.
To take can number 2 and put it into orbiter slot Alpha.
Columbia lifted off with 50 of these cans aboard, but the crew used 22 of them before the primary system failed to keep carbon dioxide levels lower than normal. Some of their experiments required it. Now the crew will be required to come home early if the main carbon dioxide eater is not repaired. They have enough cans to keep the air fresh for a week, which means 5 more working days, with 2 days reserved for landing weather delays. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting.
Die Besatzung der amerikanischen Raumfähre Columbia hat einen Defekt in der Luftversorgungsanlage beseitigt. Damit konnten die Astronauten verhindern, dass der Flug verkürzt werden muss. Die Störung an einer Filteranlage für Kohlendioxid war am Freitag aufgetreten. Die Columbia-Besatzung untersucht die Auswirkungen eines Weltraumaufenthaltes auf Gehirne und Nervensysteme verschiedener Lebewesen.
NASA says astronauts on board Space Shuttle Columbia have fixed a faulty air cleansing system. The device that removes carbon dioxide from the air inside Columbia failed on Friday, forcing the crew to use non-recyclable canisters to cleanse the air. About an hour was spent on fixing the problem, which included capping a valve that normally releases nitrogen into the shuttle cabin. The successful repair means the crew should be able to stay in space for 16 or 17 days, the full length of the planned mission.
An Bord der US-Raumfähre Columbia haben in der Nacht einen Defekt der Luftreinigungsanlage repariert. Wie die Bodenkontrolle in Cape Canaveral mitteilte, kann damit die auf 16 Tage angesetzte Mission wie geplant bis Anfang Mai fortgesetzt werden. Wegen der Panne hatte die US-Raumfahrtbehörde NASA befürchtet, die Forschungsreise um 3 bis 4 Tage verkürzen zu müssen.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ann Kellen. If there is life anywhere in the universe besides our Earth, chances are it's on a planet orbiting some star. The evidence is growing that planets do exist outside our solar system. Now astronomers are watching what seems to be the process of planets forming around a distant star. How did Earth form? That question has long puzzled scientists. Astronomers speculated that solar systems condense from clouds of dust surrounding young stars. But now 2 teams of researchers say they have convincing evidence this is, in fact, how planets form. It's a process that's going on all around us.
The bottom line is what we're discovering now is planets and the process of developing those planets, how planets form. And I think what we're finding is that that process is ubiquitous. It's common.
This star is called HR 4796. It's in the constellation Centaurus, about 220 light years from Earth. New images from telescopes in Hawaii and Chile show the dust cloud, or protoplanetary disk around the star, has developed a hole in the middle. Though they can't see the actual planets, scientists say that's the area where they're forming.
We see in the interior region of the disk a hole which was cleared out, we feel, by the formation of planets in the region close to the star.
It has just been in the last couple of years that scientists have detected the presence of planets outside our solar system, known as extrasolar planets. Just this week, scientists announced new evidence suggesting planets around the stars Beta Pictoris, Fomalhaut, and Vega. But for many, these new planets would seem more real if we could actually see them. And though the telescopes aren't in place yet that could take these pictures, NASA says stand by.
In the future, NASA hopes to develop a system called the Planet Finder, which could actually see terrestrial planets around nearby stars.
Once Earth-like planets have been identified, NASA plans to target them for further research in hopes of finding life. And the astronauts on the Space Shuttle Columbia are about halfway through a dizzying science mission. Among the experiments, a study of how the brain interprets motion in space. Their 2-week-plus mission should end next weekend. Scientists think the Earth is warming up because of man-made pollution, but it's been hard to tell for sure because organized temperature records only go back about 100 years. Now researchers have found a way to estimate temperatures in the distant past, and they have some hot news to report. If you think it's been hot the past few summers, you're right. 3 of the past 8 years have been hotter than any year since 1400 AD. That's the word from scientists at University of Massachusetts Amherst, who found a way around a problem that has frustrated climate researchers.
There's very little instrumental climate data before about 1900, and really just a few records before the mid-19th century.
To fill the gap, Michael Mann and his colleagues turned to natural sources of information. Tree rings, coral reefs, and ice core all hold clues to the climate going back hundreds of years. The scientists matched those natural records with known climate data from the 20th century. That let them build a model that accurately estimates temperatures in the past. They found modest ups and downs over the centuries, then a spike.
But what was most striking was that the 20th century exhibited a warming trend, which is quite unprecedented in the context of our long-term reconstruction. The past 10 years were warmer by probably about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit than the long-term average before industrialization.
Looking back before 1900, they could link some of the warming to cyclical increases in the sun's brightness and the cooling to volcanic eruptions that block sunlight. But the 20th century warming had another cause.
We found that that trend did not appear to be consistent or describable in terms of changes in, for example, the brightness of the sun, but instead showed a very strong relationship with the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is attributed to human input.
The scientists say if carbon dioxide levels keep rising at the current rate, the warming trend could get even stronger. They warn that global warming could cause problems ranging from drought to flooding caused by polar ice melting. That study was published in the journal Nature.
Astronauten an Bord der US-Raumfähre Columbia können im wahrsten Sinne des Wortes wieder aufatmen. In der vergangenen Nacht reparierten sie einen Filter, der die Luft im Inneren der Raumfähre von Kohlendioxid frei halten soll. Wegen des Defekts hatte die Raumfahrtbehörde NASA überlegt, die Columbia früher als geplant zur Erde zurückzuholen. Die Mission wird nun wie vorgesehen erst in einer Woche zu Ende gehen.
Guten Tag, meine Herren. Ich höre, Sie werden da oben arg gequält, um die Auswirkungen der Schwerelosigkeit auf den Menschen zu prüfen. Wie geht es Ihnen? Commander.
Well, I feel great. I
Ich fühle mich gut. Ich habe mich ziemlich schnell an den Raum gewöhnt. Das ist ja nicht mein erster Flug. Und wenn man Kommandant ist, dann muss man die medizinischen Tests nicht mitmachen. Die anderen sind ja freiwillig. Es ist sehr wichtig, dass man diese Tests hier macht. Es gibt ja Testversuche auf der ganzen Welt, die so etwas testen. Und Linnen hier, mein Kollege, überwacht diese Experimente. Hier, der spricht jetzt über die Experimente. Hallo Wolf, ich bin Richard Linehan und Commander Searfoss hat ja gerade schon etwas gesagt über die Experimente. Hier auf diesem Flug hatten wir bis jetzt eigentlich keine schrecklichen Dinge gehabt. Es gibt viele Geschichten über Schwerelosigkeit. Wir hatten hier ein Experiment, ein medizinisches gemacht. Da haben wir also Nadeln in den Fuß getan, ins Bein getan, unter dem Knie. Das sind fast Akupunkturnadeln, wenn Sie die kennen. Und die gehen nicht so tief rein. Damit misst man das elektrische Potenzial in den Nerven. Wir haben noch andere Experimente gemacht hier hinten. Das kann man jetzt schlecht sehen, weil das von der Kamera nicht so gut ist. Aber wir machen hier ein Experiment in einer Zentrifuge, wo man dann also sich dreht und dann sieht, wie die Augenreflexe laufen und wie also Auge und Gehirn miteinander kommunizieren, sich verhalten in der Schwerelosigkeit. Das ist ein interessantes Experiment. Es macht sogar Spaß, auf diesem Drehstuhl sich zu drehen. Wir können also bis zu 1 G und bis zu ein halbes G hier simulieren.
Rick, Sie haben eine Menge Schlangen, Schnecken, Ratten mit dort oben und auch die werden also ziemlichen Torturen unterzogen. Wozu soll das gut sein? Wollen wir eines Tages eine Arche Noah im Weltraum machen oder sind das Experimente, die letztlich, naja, man dem Menschen ersparen will?
Zunächst mal würde ich hier nicht von Folter sprechen. Das sind Forschungstiere wie in jedem anderen Tierversuchslabor auf der Erde. Sie werden hier richtig gut behandelt und aufrechterhalten mit der Technologie, die wir dazu haben. Und diese Experimente, na gut, ich selber mag keine Spinnen, aber ich würde sagen, diese Experimente sind interessant für Menschen. Wir wollen damit den Astronauten helfen, länger bei solchen Missionen unterwegs zu sein. Und das wird auch medizinische Vorteile für die Menschen auf der Erde haben. Die Experimente, die wir machen, sind Experimente, die man auf der Erde eben nicht durchführen kann und die man auch mit Menschen nicht durchführen kann. Aber das sind Tests, die Standards folgen, die vom amerikanischen Gesetz gesetzt worden sind, wo es um die richtige Behandlung von Testtieren geht.
Unsere Zeit ist jetzt um. Wir wünschen weiterhin einen guten Flug und eine sichere Heimkehr. So, meine Damen und Herren, wir hatten 4 Minuten von einer sehr, sehr kostbaren Zeit eines Raumschiffes und seiner Besatzung. Nicht alles konnte die Kamera uns zeigen. Das Himmelsfenster schloss sich sehr schnell. Es passiert dort viel Kompliziertes und Medizinisches auf dieser Mission. Und Jörg Brase erklärt uns jetzt nachträglich noch einmal das neurologische Labor und überhaupt diesen wissenschaftlichen Beitrag von uns Europäern und nicht zuletzt von deutschen Forschern und Firmen. Und er nimmt uns noch einmal mit auf eine kurze Reise in 2 unbekannte Welten. Das unendliche All da draußen und in unser Hirn und unser Nervensystem die noch weitgehend unbekannte Welt in unserem Innern.
Es geht noch mal rund auf dem wohl letzten Flug des europäischen Weltraumlabors Space Lab. Karussell fahren, Ball spielen und schlafen, natürlich im Dienste der Wissenschaft. Alles dreht sich hier um das Leben in der Schwerelosigkeit, nicht nur bei den Menschen an Bord, auch bei über 2000 Tieren, die mit auf die Reise gingen. Fische und Schnecken wurden beobachtet, auch Ratten und Mäuse in die Schwerelosigkeit geschickt. Einige davon ließen dort ihr Leben, doch Bilder von den Tierversuchen im All, die gibt es offensichtlich nicht. Zum 21. Mal ist Space Lab unterwegs, Huckepack im amerikanischen Shuttle. Mit Space Lab konnten die Europäer dabei sein und brauchten den Weltraum nicht Russen und Amerikanern allein zu überlassen. Auch wenn das Labor jetzt bald verschrottet wird, Für Europa war es das Tor in die Zukunft.
Ich glaube, dass wir heute sagen dürfen, dass Europa diese Prüfung bestanden hat und gut bestanden hat. Sonst hätten uns die Amerikaner wohl schwerlich aufgefordert und eingeladen, an der Raumstation mitzuarbeiten.
Als Merbold auf dem Jungfernflug von Spacelab 1983 durch die Luke kroch, war er auch der erste Europäer, den die Amerikaner mitfliegen ließen. 4 weitere Deutsche waren später noch mit dabei. Ernst Messerschmidt, der mittlerweile verstorbene Reinhard Furrer, Ulrich Walter und Hans Schlegel. Sie und die anderen Wissenschaftsastronauten aus aller Welt testeten Werkstoffe, erforschten den menschlichen Organismus, stellten astronomische Beobachtungen an und legten das Fundament für neue Pläne. Die gemeinsame Raumstation von NASA, Russland, Japan, Kanada und den Europäern.
Was mit dem Spacelab begonnen wurde, das wird in der Raumstation fortgesetzt werden in diesen Jahren. Die Leute, die dort oben arbeiten, die werden 4 Monate, 5 Monate, 6 Monate dort oben vor Ort bleiben und wissenschaftliche Experimente zu machen haben.
In 7, 8 Jahren soll die Raumstation fertig sein. Und auch der nächste große Schritt ist bereits in Planung, nämlich der auf den Mars. Doch ein Schritt nach dem anderen. Erstmal müssen die, die jetzt oben sind, so heil wie möglich zurück auf die Erde kommen.
Well, after conducting a test, NASA officials have found that part of a system used by the Space Shuttle Columbia has failed. NASA says the shuttle should be able to land safely as scheduled on Sunday, however. The system is used to power the shuttle's brakes, its rudder, and steering surfaces. The shuttle has 3 of the units. It can operate safely with 1 or even 2 not working. The problem occurred once before, and that shuttle landed without any problems.
An approaching meteor shower is expected to create a brilliant display of shooting stars this fall. It won't be any threat to Earth itself, but scientists say there is a potential threat to orbiting satellites. CNN's Jim Hill reports.
It's expected to be the biggest meteor show in decades, coming soon to the night skies.
Just a profusion of shooting stars, and it's a very nice celestial display.
The Leonid meteor shower, best seen in Asia this year, has occurred every November for centuries. The tiny meteoroids burning up harmlessly in the Earth's atmosphere. But astronomers say this year will be the strongest one since 1966.
Although the event some 30 years ago was far more intense than the one expected this November, there are more targets this time around. About 500 operational satellites are now orbiting the Earth, compared to only about 100 30 years ago.
Anything above this line, the meteor particles are outside the Earth's orbit.
People who operate the commercial and military satellites attended a conference in Manhattan Beach, California, to assess the threat to their sensitive high-tech equipment. Although most meteoroids are the size of a grain of sand, they're going fast, very fast.
Over 200,000 feet per second, so it's about 100 times faster than a bullet. So that's really moving. And that type of velocity means that even a very, very small particle can cause physical damage.
Scientists can't predict the risk to satellites with any guarantee, but they say the odds of satellite damage are low.
I think it's very unlikely that any major satellites will be impacted by a meteor particle to the extent that it can no longer operate.
Companies that insure the $16 billion of space hardware orbiting the Earth were also at the conference, but they say they're not too worried.
The possibility, let's say, of 100 satellites being damaged or lost during this event is extremely low, so we would not expect a disaster.
Still, satellites with especially delicate equipment, like the Hubble Space Telescope, are taking protective action. The Hubble will be turned to angle its optics away from the incoming particles. Other than that, all scientists and engineers can do is hope and perhaps wish on their lucky star. Jim Hill, CNN, Manhattan Beach, California.
The corkscrew shape and funnel cloud of a tornado is a frightening sight anywhere on Earth.
Now scientists have found tornadoes on the sun. The solar tornadoes are more powerful than earthbound ones, with winds up to 300,000 miles per hour. The European Space Agency probe called SOHO spotted them near the sun's north and south poles. ESA scientists hope the tornadoes will shed new light on activity on the sun's surface.
These are phenomena which we are very much interested to understand because they probably are the source of other phenomena which we have been looking for so many years and we have not been able yet to understand.
The solar tornadoes are actually what's called coronal mass ejections, jets of hot gas coming off the sun's surface. This is the first time scientists have seen them take a tornado shape. SOHO is studying the sun from a vantage point about 1 million miles above the Earth, close enough to the sun to threaten the spacecraft.
So one of the biggest problems we have, of course, is getting the heat away from it. It absorbs the heat from the sun, and if it were just left there without any control, it would cook. So what we've done is designed a spacecraft where we can reject the heat from the sun.
Who played a major role.
Scientists say studying the tornadoes may help them learn more about the solar wind, which sweeps charged particles out from the sun that can disrupt power transmission and satellite communication on Earth. Rick Lockridge, CNN reporting.
We also performed observation of the Earth as it went by underneath us. We photographed this with still cameras and video cameras, getting super images such as this one as we're entering the Mediterranean, looking there at Gibraltar. We had a variety of cameras to record these images as they went by. Here you can see the green Nile area as well as the Red Sea and the colorful desert around it. Here, Commander of the mission, Rick Searfoss, has a 400mm lens attached to a 35mm camera and taking more detailed photographs. Here you can see some sun glint on the coast of North Carolina, the Cape Hatteras area. And we also had still cameras in 70mm and also the 35 mentioned before. Here you can see Baja, California, again with a bit of sun glint on it. While we were on orbit, we had the opportunity to make a communications link with the Russian space station Mir and had the chance to talk to fellow astronaut Andy Thomas. During the course of the 16-day mission, we need to practice to keep our skills sharp, especially for being ready to re-enter and land the orbiter at the Kennedy Space Center. Here we have a special computer with a simulator software program on board called Pilot. Both the commander and the pilot were able to use this to retain their skills and receive the feedback of a score for every run that they accomplished. Also during the mission we performed different link-ups for public affairs purposes and able to complete some of those. Before the end of our 16-day mission started wrapping up with the sun setting here and getting ready to prepare the vehicle for re-entry. While on orbit, we pulled everything out and utilized all the equipment for our experiments, but that meant that we had to put it all away before we came back down to the Earth. So as you can see, the lab was pretty full earlier and now putting everything away. We also had to pull the seats back out here on the mid-deck and also up on the flight deck where we had stowed them for the orbital period. Now we had to reinstall them for the entry. While we're on orbit, everything seems to grow as it takes longer to try to re-stow everything in the small lockers they were stowed in on the way uphill. Go ahead and close the payload bay doors here to reconfigure the orbiter to get it ready to become a glider to re-enter the atmosphere.
A malfunctioning computer is not expected to disrupt the homecoming of the Space Shuttle Columbia. The U.S. spacecraft is scheduled to return to Earth in about 3 hours. CNN's John Holloman has details of Columbia's 16-day mission.
Them on the chair like this on the
The astronauts spinning in this chair and some bizarre behavior by rats will be the pictures that most people remember about Columbia's shuttle mission. For more than 2 weeks, the crew of 7 conducted experiments into what makes the brain do what it does. The spinning chair was designed to determine how the brain and the inner ear react to weightlessness. Its results could help older people who have trouble maintaining their balance. Canadian astronaut Dave Williams says it's a weird feeling to spin at 45 revolutions a minute.
Because of the illusions that you get when you're doing the experiment. Strapping into the chair, of course, we're floating around before we strap in, so we have no necessary orientation. We strap in and we close the head unit, and the pressure on my face makes me feel like I'm inverted all of a sudden, very similar to if you're standing on your head on Earth. And then as the chair starts to spin up, I go from feeling like I'm inverted to feeling like I'm lying on my side.
At the beginning of the flight, there were 141 baby rats on board, rats so young they had never walked on Earth. They were studied to see how rats learned to move around without gravity. One goal was to find out if human babies could adapt after being born in space.
Well, it's amazing to watch the animals behave in orbit because they act just like we do. And we're finding that they learn very fast in terms of how to maintain themselves in zero-G, to ambulate, move around in their cages, get to the food and water.
An unexpected result. Most of the rats died because their mothers were unable or unwilling to feed them. Mission managers had one big problem to solve, a failure of the automatic air cleaning system. The astronauts had to use a backup to remove carbon dioxide from their air until the mechanical system could be fixed. NASA managers are saying the Neurolab flight was so successful, they may let this crew go back to space this summer and conduct more experiments on the brain. John Holloman, CNN Atlanta.
A programming note here, CNN is going to be carrying live coverage of the shuttle landing. That's coming up in just under an hour at the times that are shown here on your screen.
Thanks, Wolf. We are waiting for the shuttle landing, and I do have some weather information for you. This is not going to give anybody a problem. Out at Cape Canaveral, looking at sunny skies. Temperature just about 74 degrees. It's ranging anywhere from 73 to 77 degrees around the Cape. Winds are light out of the west-southwest. I've seen the max at 6 miles an hour, so that's not going to be a problem for anybody. Something that will be a problem, though, is up to the northwest, but it's certainly not going to be for the shuttle landing. They should make it down just fine, but this cold front system pulling into Mississippi and Georgia, or Alabama and Georgia rather, has continued strong thunderstorms. Currently there is a severe thunderstorm warning in effect for Crawford County, Georgia, and we continue to see that activity throughout the afternoon as the front moves to the east. Late Edition is up next.
Live from CNN in Washington, this is Late Edition with Wolf Blitzer.
It's noon in Washington, 9 a.m. in Palo Alto, California, 5 p.m. in London, and 8 p.m. in Moscow. Wherever you're watching from around the world, thanks very much for joining us on this special 90-minute Late Edition. We'll get to our guests shortly, but first an update on the day's top stories. The Space Shuttle Columbia is headed for home. After more than 2 weeks in space, Columbia is expected to land about 5 minutes from now. We'll take you live to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the landing when it happens. Keeping an eye on the shuttle for us, as he always does, CNN's John Holloman. He joins us now live from the CNN Center in Atlanta. John.
Hi, old friend. Shuttle Columbia is going to be on the ground in about 2 minutes. Let's go to the skies above the Kennedy Space Center and look at it. It has traveled 6,375,000 miles. It's going to touch down on runway 33 at the Kennedy Space Center. In the past few minutes, Commander Rick Searfoss has made his final turn and lined up for the runway. Now, this is what you're seeing on the left. The big picture on your screen is what the pilot is seeing, looking out the front window of Shuttle Columbia. The picture on the right is, of course, a picture taken from the ground of the shuttle. You can see there's a certain amount of haze in the sky today, but it's not hazy. It's not so hazy that the commander and the pilot can't see the landing strip approaching up ahead. During this mission, Columbia and its crew of 7 astronauts has done some basic research to answer the questions, why do people sometimes get dizzy when they stand up suddenly? Why it's so difficult for some people to sleep at night? And why do people lose their balance for no apparent reason sometimes?
1 minute away from touchdown.
The crew experimented with 140 rats, many of whom died unexpectedly. This was a series of experiments on how newborn mammals adapt to weightlessness. Now, the ultimate question to be answered by all of this rat experimentation is whether a human baby born in space could survive normally. The answer to that question, despite what happened to the rats, seems to be yes. Wolf, if you look straight ahead there, you can see one of the bodies of water in front of the shuttle, and up where that cross is at the top of your screen is the runway.
So there are, John, a few live animals still aboard the shuttle in addition to the crew.
Yeah, these rats won't live very long after they get back, Wolf. They're designed to be dissected for scientific research. Let's listen in now as the shuttle touches down. There's a microphone down there at the end of the runway to hear the sound it makes. like the back wheels hit the ground right where they were supposed to. You know, Wolf, when you were talking about the fact the shuttle was going to land in a few minutes, I was checking in with NASA. At that moment, it was 18 miles up in the sky, and it was traveling at more than 5,000 miles an hour. So just in that short period of time, it's had to slow down.
Bringing home with them an extensive amount of data gathered on the human.
And John, when's the next shuttle scheduled, do you know?
Yeah, it's going to go up about the 2nd day of June. That's the current takeoff time. It's the shuttle that's going to go up to the Mir space station and bring astronaut Andy Thomas back from Mir. I talked to Andy Thomas last week. He's been up there almost 4 months now. He is ready to take a hot shower. He said, I've been in the military. I've been a lot of places where you didn't get to, you know, bathe for a few days, but not having a bath for 4 months is something he had never counted on before. Shuttle's rolling to a stop. Soon as the wheels stop, we're going to hear a little welcome home message.
Wheel stop.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful landing, Rick, and congratulations to you and your crew on a historic mission that elevated neuroscience research to record heights.
Okay, Wolf, they're back. All right. That landing and touchdown was mighty pretty to watch. The ground managers in Houston and at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida are already now starting preparations for this next mission to send Discovery up to Mir and pick up Andy Thomas. Columbia will go back up probably maybe 6 months from now. Wolf?
Okay, John Holloman, no matter how many times you or I see that landing, it is a spectacular sight. Thanks for bringing it to our worldwide audience.
Sure. See ya.
And we're going to switch.
Die amerikanische Raumfähre ist vor einer halben Stunde nach Cape Canaveral zurückgekehrt. So sah der Landeanflug aus dem Cockpit aus. Den Astronauten geht es offenbar gut. Sie hatten während der 16-tägigen Reise untersucht, wie sich ein Weltraumaufenthalt auf Gehirn und Nervensystem verschiedener Tiere auswirkt. Für die Experimente waren mehr als 2000 Ratten, Mäuse, Heuschrecken und andere Lebewesen an Bord.
Die Raumfähre Columbia ist vor einer Dreiviertelstunde sicher in Cape Canaveral in Florida gelandet. Während ihrer 16 Tage dauernden Mission hatten die 7 Astronauten viele Experimente durchgeführt, darunter auch deutsche Forschungsprojekte. Christoph Lang mit den Einzelheiten.
Reggae-Musik weckte die Astronauten in der Columbia an ihrem letzten Arbeitstag und aus der Bodenstation gab's Lob. Kommt heim von einer großartigen Mission. Unser Space Lab hat ein letztes Mal gezeigt, was es kann. Das in Deutschland entwickelte Raumlabor hat nun nämlich ausgedient mit einem letzten Flug, in dem die Medizin im Vordergrund stand. 16 Tage lang untersuchten die Astronauten vor allem das Nervensystem und den Blutkreislauf. Zum Beispiel wurde mit Hilfe eines Balles gemessen, wie die Reaktionsmuster in der Schwerelosigkeit aussehen. Die Messdaten sollen letztlich Patienten auf der Erde zugutekommen.
Hier wird Forschung unter den extremen Bedingungen des Weltraums getrieben, letztlich um der Medizin und der Biowissenschaft auf der Erde zu dienen.
Auch deutsche Institute waren an den Versuchen beteiligt, für die ein halber Zoo ins All geflogen wurde. Ratten, Schnecken und Fische. Obwohl Dutzende von Tieren unter ungeklärten Umständen verendeten, gelten die Testreihen als Erfolg. Vor einer halben Stunde setzte die Columbia dann in Florida auf. Ein defektes Hydrauliksystem, das der NASA Sorgen gemacht hatte, störte die Landung letztendlich nicht im geringsten.
Our deorbit burn took place about an hour prior to landing and some 12,000 miles away, basically on the other side of the world. We re-entered the atmosphere 4,000 miles away from Kennedy Space Center at an altitude of about 400,000 feet. It was a great view for me as the pilot looking out the right side of my window as we were in a right bank coming over San Francisco, Las Vegas, and out near Texas. Really felt low after being at 150 miles in space to now be down at 200,000 feet during part of the re-entry. The shuttle enters at a 20-degree glide slope, then pulls up during the landing phase as we flare to land. Here you can see runway 33 at Kennedy Space Center that we were landing on as we're getting ready to come into the final flare. The landing gear are lowered at about 300 feet, and then the mission commander hand flies the orbiter in for a smooth touchdown on the runway, about 2,000 feet down from the end. Once we've touched down, we keep the nose in the air at first, deploy the drag chute to help us slow down, and then smoothly lower the nose. The drag chute almost makes the brakes not required as it slows us down very rapidly. We let it go at about 60 knots so that it won't contact any of the shuttle main engine bells during the deceleration. Although it might seem that the mission's over with our landing, it's actually not. There's a lot of data collection ahead for us, for both the human subjects and for the animals on board, to see how we readapt to 1G after a 16-day mission in 0G. But before that can happen, we need to get the convoy out to make sure that the orbiter is safe and to be ready to service the vehicle. Then we had a chance that evening, after some data collection, to get back out and take a look at the orbiter.
The astronauts who just landed on Space Shuttle Columbia worked in secret around the clock during their mission to save the lives of laboratory rats inside the Neurolab module.
We had a veterinary ICU going in the module for, I would think, about a week.
The purpose of the rat experiment was to see if newborns could adapt to weightlessness and to study changes in the inner ear from weeks in zero gravity, lessons that might eventually apply to human infants. It was several days into the 16-day mission when the experimental rats started looking sick.
They didn't look very well. No, that didn't look like the mother was grooming them, and they looked probably a bit emaciated and dehydrated. So at that point, we decided, well, ethically, we can't not look at the other animals.
Linehan saw that many animals were dying. He asked for help from the flight crew, including Dave Williams, who also happens to be a surgeon.
And I got my crash course in veterinary emergency medicine from Rick, and I think it worked out really well. But if it was not for Rick's efforts, I think the losses that we would have had from dehydration would have been a lot more.
Shuttle Commander Rick Searfoss and other astronauts took the rats out of their cages, fed them, warmed them in their hands, washed and dried them, one by one.
Literally, there were several nights there where the payload guys were getting 4, maybe 5 hours of sleep, and I did not see a way around that. And as the commander on the crew, I was obviously very important with taking care of the humans on board, very critical not only for the science and the payload aspect, but to keep them functioning and working well as a team. And not once did I hear a complaint from anyone.
Mission scientists say that as Columbia landed, a few dozen of the 140 rats remained alive, a tribute, they say, to the heroic efforts by the astronauts. John Holloman, CNN Atlanta.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of...
Just about everything an astronaut does, and even the equipment they wear, benefits patients back on Earth.
On the Neurolab mission, the STS-90 mission that I flew on, we did a whole series of experiments looking at how the sleep patterns of astronauts change when we're out in space.
But it's not just the data that turns out to be useful.
And it's actually a full clinical sleep lab in that headgear.
Looking at how Dr. Dave Williams slept required developing a small, portable hospital sleep lab for use in the cramped living quarters of the shuttle. 70 million Americans have problems sleeping, and some may now be able to use similar technology to have their own problems analyzed at home.
Hopefully we'll be able to help them understand what it is that's causing their sleep problem, come up with a therapy to be able to work with them to solve their problem.
Mae Jemison will be making her first trip in space today.
Dr. Mae Jemison is a former astronaut who now runs a foundation that focuses on improving health care in developing countries. An environmentalist, she says space exploration allows a unique way of looking at how and where climates are changing. That, she says, will help doctors predict where disease-carrying insects, animals, and fungus will spread to next.
When I look toward the future, I think some of the most exciting things actually have to do with using space-based observations to help predict disease patterns here on Earth.
Both she and Williams point out the number of lives saved from the money spent in space is incalculable.
With the International Space Station set to be manned as early as next year, scientists are beginning to see a whole new array of possibilities in more long-term experiments in space. Eileen O'Connor, CNN, at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Neurolab used outer space to explore inner space. Our results will not only help astronauts, but also people on Earth as well.